TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. It's your friendly neighborhood philosopher here, D. Wood. With me now, got Anthony Rogers. How you doing, Anthony?
I'm doing good.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. So, unless you've been living under a rock, there was a big debate on the Fresh and Fit podcast recently. And I guess this is different because it's just someone who's not known for having Christian versus Muslim, like actual official debates. If you're not familiar, Fresh and Fit podcast is a show where they get like 6 or 8 girls, OnlyFans girls with their boobs all up in everyone's faces, and then they get together and talk. So it's kind of, it's a brilliant little marketing strategy. We should do a theology version of this, Anthony. We should have a bunch of babes.
I'm not even boobs. Sure. I was just going to say, I don't know how you do a theological version of that, but apparently you're including even the exposure.
Yeah. So that's how the Fresh and Fit show normally works. You get a bunch of girls in there with their boobs in everyone's faces, and then like people watch it, and they're kind of watching it for the girls, but they'll also hear what you're talking about maybe in the process. So that's the idea. And then they decided to have a Christian Muslim debate. Myron announced on Twitter that he wanted to have I forget what he said, 2-on-2, 3-on-3 or whatever, but it ended up being a 2-on-2. And it was Sam Shamoun and Dyer representing the Christian side, and Ijaz, Ahmed, and Daniel Haqiqatjou on the Muslim side. All right. And the debate had three main sections. There's a Trinity Tawhid section at the beginning. Then there's a Quran versus the Bible preservation. That was in the middle. And then at the end, there's a Christian versus Muslim morality debate. And so anyway, yesterday when AP had watched it before the show yesterday, and he told me he wasn't interested in the Trinity versus Tawhid section of the debate. So AP said he's not interested in the Trinity Tawhid stuff. He's interested in the Quran versus the Bible stuff and the morality stuff. And so I'm interested in the Trinity versus Tawhid. In fact, from a Muslim perspective, that's what they're most interested in. So I didn't want to leave that undone. So I messaged Anthony at the beginning of the show, because Anthony's done debates on Trinity versus Tawhid with, which debates have you had on that? I remember you debated Shabir on this.
Actually, yeah. So before that, though, interestingly, one of my earliest debates was with Ijaz. It wasn't on Tawhid, but we debated the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament. Is that a distinct divine person already revealed before the coming of Christ? That was, he was something of a newcomer in those days. We'd been around for a long time, writing stuff on answering Islam, on your blog, answering Muslims. But it was my first, or one of my earliest, formal debates. So I actually debated Ijaz. But more noteworthy was the debate with Shabir. We did 2 debates. Actually, I've done 6 total with Shabir. I know you've done scores of them, but we've done 6, usually 2 at a time. So the first 2 debates I did with Shabir were on the Trinity and Tawhid. So, in fact, those are my favorite debates with Shabir. I've liked all of them, but those were my favorites because, like you said, this is the go-to issue. This is the heart and soul of Christianity versus the heart and soul of Islam. So I couldn't help but love both those debates.
And so Anthony's familiar with a lot of the arguments that are going to pop up. I haven't watched this. I haven't watched the Trinity Tawhid section of this debate. We have an idea. We have an idea of what the Christian side will bring up. We have an idea of what the Muslim side's going to bring up, and got Anthony here because he's debated this stuff and can help break it down for anyone who's not familiar with it. And so anyway, the AP didn't want to do this during his show tonight, and I thought, hey, we always get complaints from European viewers that we don't go live earlier, so they can't watch it because it's in the middle of the night for them. And so Anthony said he was good for now, and so that's how we ended up having a live stream at 4 o'clock on a Saturday on this topic. So we're just going to go through, I think it's about 50 minutes long. The Trinity versus Tawhid portion of this debate. Again, we have a good idea of what the Christian side is going to say. Good idea of what the Muslim side is going to say. Good idea of how the Muslims are going to complain about what the Christians are going to say. And I've already seen some glimpses of it. It's actually funny because Khalil Andani, so he's an Ismaili Muslim scholar, and he's responding to Daniel Haqiqatjou. And so Daniel Haqiqatjou posted after the debate. He's complaining about he's accusing the Christian side of being hypocrites for complaining about that Allah has literal body parts, right? So they're pointing out at some point during this debate, they're going to be pointing out that Allah has various body parts. And then Daniel responds by pointing out that in the Bible, Jesus is said to be at the right hand of God. And so Daniel, look, the Christian says right hand of God, right hand of God. And so you guys also have a God who has hands and so on. And anyway, Khalil burned him up. He responded and said, "You're Salafi," talking to Daniel Haqiqatjou. Daniel's Salafi, right? He's in the Salafi camp? Yeah?
I believe so.
Yeah, so Khalil says, "Your Salafi Athari creed requires that Muslims believe that Allah has a real hand as befits his majesty." So it's interesting. He's actually phrasing it the way they do it. They'll say, yes, he has this as befits his majesty, has a real hand as befits his majesty. And anyone who denies that Allah has a real hand and takes it as a metaphor, you Salafis declare them an innovator. Sam, it's just amazing to see Khalil Andani like, no, actually, Sam's right here. Anyway, it says, Sam does not affirm that God has a real hand. The Christians interpret such expressions, God's two hands, as metaphors or as symbolic reference to the Son and the Holy Spirit. On this particular point, Catholic theology is more coherent than your anthropomorphism. Wow. Wow. So, guys, this is an ongoing problem where they'll have a methodology and then we'll say, oh, since this is your methodology, this is where your methodology leads. And then they'll say, aha, but you have the same thing. And they'll apply their methodology, which we reject, to us, and then say, you get the same result. Yes, if we had your methodology, but we don't. So it seems like, again, we're about to watch it. I haven't watched it, but it seems like Sam is really pressing them on some of the implications of their Salafi views. And
so we're making predictions here. You already said some of what you think we can expect. What I've heard for years, and I'd be surprised if this doesn't come out, what I've heard for years from Muslims, which is really what got me interested in this, besides the fact that they're constantly attacking the Trinity, I always thought, well, why aren't we taking the attack to them as well? But one of the things I heard all the time was that Islam's doctrine of God is clear, it's simple, and it's agreed upon. Yeah. And so initially, you hear that,
you think it's true.
It's a good propaganda technique. People repeat things and you sort of buy it, right? If they're all saying it, nobody's dissenting, then that must be the way it is. But the more you read, you start to realize, no, this just hasn't been the case. And you can see why it hasn't been the case. It hasn't been the case historically. And then when you look at the sources that they're arguing about, you can see why it hasn't been the case. There's all sorts of reasons to debate over this sort of thing and how it actually falls out. So I'll be surprised if Ijaz and Haqiqatjou don't pretend that their doctrine is clear and that it's simple. It's not just that it's clear, but another selling point is that it's simple. Mm-hmm. Everybody can understand this.
Yeah, little kid can get this.
Yeah. even Muhammad's 6-year-old bride could get this, right? So this means that it's true. It's supposed to follow that if it's simple, then it's also true. And then they'll, as much as they can, they like to pretend that it's agreed upon. I think this is becoming harder for them to maintain because word is getting out on the streets that no, this isn't agreed upon. In fact, when we've got Muslims at Hyde Park over there debating each other, I haven't seen anything like that lately, but I remember not too long ago, a bunch of them were going at each other's throats over their differences in Aqidah. So the idea that it's agreed upon is not as easy to float these days, but they're still pretending that it's clear and simple, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's so that I'm sure they're doing, and the discussion of Allah's body parts and discussions of how complicated it actually is with, you've got Allah and then you've got his eternal speech, which he speaks out from all eternity. So his speech is eternal with him. And Salafis usually say this is one of Allah's attributes. So of course it's co-eternal with Allah and so on. But I'm sure Sam is bringing up, in fact, I heard this somewhere. I don't remember. I don't remember if it was in the comments or something, but that the Quran actually takes the form of a pale man at the judgment, and appears and can appear and speak and intercede for Muslims. And then, of course, you've got individual chapters of the Quran which appear as flocks of birds, and they also intercede. And so, anyway, the point there is the point there is not whether it's true or false. It's that it's way more complicated than Muslims let on. So you've got Allah, you've got his eternal speech, which he's eternally speaking out. You've got his eternal spirit, which he's breathing out, and then the spirit that he breathes out can actually appear as a man, appears to Mary, and his word, his speech that he speaks out, appears as a pale man. So they're appearing as personal agents. And then within the one personal agent that is that pale man, that is the eternal speech of Allah that appears as a pale man, within that one personal agent who intercedes for Muslims, there are 114 individual personal flocks of birds that intercede for people. And somehow it's one, the guy's point here is this is way more complicated than Muslims let on. And it's like Anthony said, it's actually a parallel to the situation with like Qurans over the centuries, that you have historically had different Qurans, and yet just for dawah purposes, Muslims in recent decades have said, no, there's only one Quran perfectly preserved right down to the letter. It's totally made up. But they said it for dawah purposes because no one was in a position to correct them. And it's similar with their theology. You have different camps saying different things. They fought over it in the past many times. And it's a much more confusing debate than would be helpful to them for dawah purposes. And so what do? They say, Islamic theology is so simple and we're all united and we're all on the same page, unlike Christians. And no. Stop lying. Stop lying for dawah. Stop lying for dawah. Anyway, guys, we're going to go through this this portion of the debate. Let's get these first few super chats in, and then we'll jump right into the debate. Ohio, Sigma, Rizzler, Baby, Gronk in Ohio, Rizzy, Skibby. I know what the word Ohio means. Other than that,
I thought this was going to be another one of these. You need to know the backstory.
Yeah. No, some of them are. D-Wood, I usually dislike you, but I got to give you props for getting Anthony off the streets and into the lumberjack business, as Allah hates the homeless.
I think he's referring to me shaving the beard.
Yeah, now we can't even call you Sons of Anarchy reject.
It'll come back.
Hey, those initials, if you're the Sons of Anarchy reject, your initials would be SOAR. That's pretty cool. SOAR. SOAR. Could be a song.
Every time we named our kids, I know other people didn't grow up in the same kind of environment I did, but every time we named our kids, I had to sit there. I would tell my wife, wait, I have to think through this for a moment. I had to think through what the letters could spell. I had to think through different, because I was thinking of how people are going to make fun of one of our kids. I'm thinking we don't want to set our kids up for getting, ridiculed or, growing up where you're making fun of each other. This is the sort of thing you think of. So I thought, we can't name our kid, something that rhymes with some bad word or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, Soar's pretty cool.
Abu Ahruf says, so the top left corner was the one big Zabuba. Yes, one big Zabuba. Not sure what this is saying. Ahmed here says, thanks for convincing me that Jesus is Lord. Happy to help, Ahmed. Do Muslims need to back up to and sit in urinals to avoid hellfire? Yeah, to avoid the punishment of the grave. Well, it's not talking about sitting down on toilets. That's not what they had. But yeah, in the Sunni hadiths, it says that you have to squat to pee, and that most of the punishment of the grave is because of urinating improperly. So the modern version of that would be sitting to pee. Hey, SIIIG is in the chat and seeking to join you for the talk if you're willing. Yeah, I don't know how to contact him to send him the link, though. Hey, SIIIG, where you at?
What's happening?
Hey, SIIIG, where you at, man? Hey, SIIIG, tell me how to get in touch with you. You on Twitter or something like that? I can send you a message on Twitter if you want to jump in. All right, a couple more. Let's see. Anthony, keep an eye for a few seconds on the chat and see if SIIIG posts how to get in touch with him.
Oh, okay. I didn't have it up.
Don't worry about it then. Don't worry about it then. If you don't have it up, don't worry about it. I'll keep an eye on it. Ayub says, what is a good apologetics and polemics training course? Hey, SIIIG, we see you there. You need to tell us how to, if you want to jump into this discussion, we need to know how to send you the link, because I don't want to just post a link or everyone's going to be clicking on it. So I have to send you specifically the link. So I would need your email, or if you're on Twitter, what your Twitter account is, and I can send you a link if you want to jump in. I think Jay Smith has a program in apologetics and polemics. If you're talking about apologetics, it depends. Do you want if you want an actual program, then there are certificate programs, and then there are actually master's degrees in apologetics and so on. But I would check Jay Smith. Because I know he will emphasize both apologetics and polemics, which not everyone emphasizes the polemics part. And let's see. We have one way here. God bless both you warriors, Yeshua Akbar. Thank you. Salafi camp, more like salami camp. It's pretty rude to all our Salafi friends. Do Salafis believe Allah has literal loin/nuts? What do you think, Anthony?
Well, yeah, they're of course going to qualify it with the phrase bila khaif without saying how, but that means precious little when you analyze this. But yeah, in fact, there's a whole book written on Islamic anthropomorphism. There's a lot of books written on Islamic anthropomorphism, but there's one that spends a good bit of time analyzing hadith statements about Allah's loins. And what's interesting is what Muslims have done to cover this up. They don't like that unsightly business about Allah's loins, so they try to cover it up in their translations. So she points out that, for example, if you look at the standard translation of Sahih al-Bukhari, the 9-volume set, it doesn't translate that part of the hadith that makes reference to Allah's loins, and it doesn't even include it in the Arabic portion. So you can't even look over to the side of the page if you know Arabic and read about Allah's loins. On the other hand, there's an abridged version of Sahih al-Bukhari, and it has the full hadith where it actually, it's weird because it's supposed to be abridged, but it gives you the full hadith where it mentions Allah's loins. So I'm not really sure what the reasoning process was there. Hide it in the larger one, but then include it. Like, so in other words, they're excising hadith they think are superfluous or whatever, but they're including in the hadiths that they do give more of the hadith than are found in some of the standard collections. And it's not only in Sahih al-Bukhari. But anyways, the Salafis, in terms of their methodology, do believe that it's literal. They would say his loins are not like our loins, but that's like saying the loins of an elephant aren't like the loins of a giraffe or something. Sure, they're going to correspond to the being that you're talking about, but they're still loins. They still appropriately have that name. And if you're a Salafi literalist, then you have to accept that.
So we're guessing you're going to have to say yes. Why did Muslims hijack an Ethiopian Orthodox word, Tawhid? It's a Ge'ez word meaning being made once or unified. Ethiopian Christians use this word to describe the Trinity. You familiar with that?
Only vaguely. But makes sense. Tawhid is the word for unification.
Great to see Anthony Rogers. He. D. Wood said boobs. It's the boobas. If Anthony wants to look wiser, he needs to grow his beard. Good point. If David wants to look wiser, he needs to pin an image of Mike Winger on his face. Yeah, but then I'd end up punching myself repeatedly in my own face. What?
I was just picturing that game. If you put a Mike Winger thing on your face, you could have apologists come up and act like they're hitting you, and then there could be a little meter next to it showing how many pounds of pressure. You know that game where people hit the punching bag and it counts how hard they hit it. Maybe we should do you with Winger on your face, and everybody gets to punch you.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. What a great idea. Apostate of Allah says hi. Says hi, Anthony. Hi to you, D. Wood. Didn't see you there. And let's see. I just sent a message to SIIIG, so we'll see if he is jumping on. All right, a couple more, and then we're going to jump into this debate. On behalf of Europeans, we thank you, D. Wood and Anthony. Yes. This is the pro-European show. Why do you guys need it over there? Because you guys are in all kinds of trouble. Why do followers of Christ argue with each other and then say extremely hurtful things to one another or about one another's beliefs? Well, I mean, it can happen, and it could be either deserved or not deserved. If someone is crossing massive lines, then you can say something, and you'd be right for calling the person out. Or if a person is not doing something like that and you blast them, then you'd be wrong. Something like that. Did you guys always know about Ahruf and Kirat, or was it Hatun and Yasser Qadi who brought it to the attention of modern apologists? No, we knew about Ahruf and Kirat because we'd been debating this and discussing this and arguing about this stuff for years. What Hatun did, and then Yasser Qadi after her, as a result of her doing it, was it's always what kind of makes it stick and gets Muslims to get the point. And for some reason, everything we were doing, you could get the point across to individual Muslims, right? Like you could sit down with an individual Muslim and say, look at what your sources actually say. This is not what your apologists are telling you. And you could eventually get the point across to an individual Muslim. For some reason, we could never popularize this point. We could never make Muslims in general aware of this. Hatun showing up at Speaker's Corner with 26 different Arabic Qurans, that's what got the point across. That's what made Muslims go, whoa, this is serious? Because it wasn't just her sitting in a room saying, I've got these different Qurans. It's her showing up at Speaker's Corner where you got a bunch of Muslims, a bunch of Arabic-speaking Muslims, and she's saying, is this verse the same as this verse? Do you see the difference? And then they couldn't deny it. And then Muhammad Hijab decided he was going to clean up the mess by getting Yasser Qadi on there, and turned into a train wreck crashing into a dumpster fire and destroyed it. So we were aware of the Ahruf and the Kirat for a long time. We could never make the point stick until the 1-2 combination, well, 1-2-3 combination of Hatun, Muhammad Hijab, and Yasser Qadi. They got it to stick. So thanks.
Just throw something in here. So a lot of people confuse proof and persuasion. So I know a lot of Christians get frustrated when they argue with unbelievers, including Muslims, because the other person keeps resisting the point or rejecting it. And they think that if the person isn't persuaded, then they haven't objectively proven what they've argued. But that's just not true. You can prove something even if a person remains unpersuaded. And the fact is, when people are persistent in denying it and they're in agreement, like Muslims have this unspoken conspiracy to just keep denying. And when people see them all denying it, they think, well, maybe there's something to their denial. Why would they all be denying it if it's, not the case? And so when Yasser Qadi comes right out and starts, letting his slip show, then it's like now people can see that it's not just us claiming that this is the case. These guys are admitting it. And so that has, I think, a big psychological impact on people. Mm-hmm. People that can't just look at the objectivity of the argument, but need to see people actually being influenced by it or impacted by it. So I think that was huge, Yasser Qadi admitting it. Mm-hmm. But for those of us that saw the evidence, we didn't need Yasser Qadi to say it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So guys, it's always about, it's the same thing with a bunch of issues. You got guys who've been programmed by the Dawah guys to think in a certain way. And even if you're responding, it's like their mentality is, well, you're a Christian, you're saying it. Who am I going to believe, you or my Dawah guy? I'm obviously going to believe the Dawah guy. And so, but what happens when the Dawah guy actually eventually is forced to agree with it? Then, at first it was, I'm not going to believe the Christians, but now my own Dawah guy is saying it. And so that's how things are working out now. We've got Albert here. God bless you both, brothers. Learned a lot from you both at the Ohio conference. Good hearing from you.
Hey, I remember Albert. Him.
What book was he referencing about the loins? What was the book? You're saying you're saying the abridged version of Bukhari.
No. I was referring to a book by a Jewish scholar, a lady actually, and I'll pull it up here so I can find the link and maybe put it in the box. So I'll pull up the link and then I'll put it in the comment section.
And one more, David, can you help? Can I help? What? What am I going to do? How am I supposed to help? How am I supposed to help in the UK? Yeah, you'd have to be more specific, Jane, if there's something you want me to do for someone in the UK. All right, guys, we ready to jump into this?
All right, here comes the link. So, well, actually, I don't have the ability to put a link here unless I go on to YouTube. But
no. Post a comment. I'll make you a moderator. That doesn't mean you come and abuse your power like I do.
I'll probably very rarely use my power.
Let's see.
I'm not a power hungry.
Hurry up! Post a comment.
Okay, so
just say yo or something.
I still have to go to YouTube, don't I? Because I was
you're not on YouTube?
No, that's okay. It's gonna play noise here. There we go. All right, here it comes.
Welcome to the Waiting for Anthony show, ladies and gentlemen.
Actually, it's still not letting.
Anthony. What are you doing?
It won't let me. So I'm just gonna.
Or you could just send me the link. You could just send me the link. I'll share it.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, no. I'm saying you can't send a link. You can't send a link because you're not a moderator. Moderators can send links.
Oh, okay. So here, I said yo.
Let's see.
Oh, now it says slow mode is on. Wait 15 seconds.
Why are you whining? All right, I just made you a moderator, I think, so you should be able to post that. All right. Okay. You can post that. If not, we'll worry about it later. You can post it in a comment or something. All right, you ready?
Yep.
We're jumping into this discussion now, ladies and gentlemen. Here you have the Trinity versus Tawhid portion of the recent debate on the Booby Show. Wait a minute.
Don't make me listen to the opening 20-minute ramble. No, I'm kidding.
No. I cut that part out. Hang on. SIIIG's trying to join here.
I don't know how long. Usually the moderators go on forever.
Yeah, I chopped that part out. Hey, SIIIG.
Hey.
I don't hear you at all. No, you've muted yourself.
Oh, I muted myself. I'm sorry, guys. Long time no talk. How you guys been?
How you doing, SIIIG?
Good.
I'm doing decent. I'll be honest. I saw the debate. I saw Twitter, and I was lost immediately. I'll be honest, guys. It was an amazing event. Yeah. How you guys doing?
Good.
So SIIIG is one of the guys I mentioned that it was actually encouraging going over to the UK because there are a bunch of young Christians over there who were just crushing it at speaker scoring and stuff. It was actually cool. But SIIIG's one of those guys. And SIIIG, before we jump into this debate, we're all set up. Anthony has basically been distracting everyone for like half hour. We're going to jump into the debate now. And why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself real quick before we jump into this?
About me? Okay. Guys, as you know, my name is SIIIG. It's got 3 eyes because of the 3 persons in the Trinity. But in truth, I just made the name up after a song that I heard. But I'm a person that makes Christian content. I specialize in metaphysics, early church history. Those are my interests. So I love doing things about that. And yeah, general Christian history, general Christian dogmatics, basic stuff. If you guys want to check that kind of stuff out, join the thing, man. And that's all I can really say.
All right, and we will find out right now in the course of this debate review.
Speaking of philosophy, is that Copleston behind you, David?
Yeah, that's the 9-volume Copleston there. Why?
I just thought it looked like.
You see, this is what Anthony does.
I always try and guess
like random
what's
stuff.
on. I always try and guess what's on people's shelves. Some books stand out. That's okay. Go ahead.
Is that
Quit
Duff's book
stalling.
behind you, Anthony? Is that Duff's book behind you?
Who?
You got Jeremy Duff's book behind you, top right corner of the screen right there.
I don't know. I don't know.
Man.
It's possible.
Now I understand why. Now I understand why AP keeps no books behind it. Now it makes sense. Now it makes sense because people like Anthony are distracted. Anthony and SIIIG.
Why is David stalling? We're trying to hear
Yes,
this debate.
David, why are you stalling? Listen, you gotta careful.
Here we go. Here you have the Trinity versus Tawhid debate on the Booby Show.
All right, man. Timer is on. Go ahead.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Islam is monotheistic. There is only one God. This is known as Tawhid. Christianity is polytheistic because Christians worship 3 separate gods known as the Trinity. Christians claim that this is false. The Trinity is not 3 separate gods. The Trinity is 3 in 1. But does this claim make sense? First of all, there's a logical contradiction in the Trinity. How can the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit all be one God, but they also not be identical beings? The Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God. It's all one God, but the Father is not the Son is not the Father, and neither of them are the Holy Spirit. This is a logical contradiction. The only
bad start, Daniel. we Daniel, speaking as a nice guy here, if you want to say it doesn't make sense or you want to point out some incoherence in the issue, that's fine. When you call it logical contradiction, it's not a logical contradiction. You don't know what logic is, buddy. You don't know what logic is.
Anthony, you want to go first?
If you said, so just to be clear, Daniel, if we were to say 3 separate beings are one being in the same sense, then that would be a contradiction. If you say God is one in one way, more than one in another way, and here are the different ways. Here's how God is one, and here's how God is here's how there's a plurality within that one nature. That's not a contradiction. You could say it's false. You could say it's incoherent or something like that. Whatever you want to say, it's not a logical contradiction. And Daniel, you can go to 100 philosophy professors who teach logic. Ask them for an explanation of the Trinity, whether they believe it or not, and even if they're like atheists or whatever, ask them if that is a logical contradiction. They're not going to agree with you, sport. We want to keep going. You guys want to comment on that? Or by the way, you guys can just tell me when to. Anytime you want me to stop, just say stop. Anytime you want to say something.
Okay.
Right.
Well, one thing I'll say at this point is I can already tell, and we anticipated this, Daniel's going to pretend that Tawhid is clear, simple, and agreed upon. Notice how quickly he breezed right past Tawhid. He asserted Islam affirms monotheism, and it just is the case, and then he proceeded to start attacking the Trinity. That's probably what's going to happen for the rest of the time. I don't know if Ijaz is going to speak as well, but he'll probably do the same thing anyways. But that's just part and parcel of what I was talking about. It's just taken as a given. It's off the table. There's no question that Islam is clear, simple, and agreed upon. And so now I can just attack the doctrine of the Trinity. And, of course, miscast it when he talks about... Now, one thing is, he doesn't even stop to explain what he means by any of these terms. Being...
It's three gods. It's three separate gods, okay?
Yeah, but I mean, when he used the term being and beings, on the one hand, he said they're not the same being. Well, it depends how you're using the term being. Of course, the Christian tradition on one definition of that term would say, yes, they are the same being. But Christians have used terms in different ways over history. For example, the Greeks and the Latins in the early church, they had a little bit of an impasse because it wasn't understood at the time how they were using certain terms differently. Once it was understood that they were using these terms in different ways, then they realized, no, we're saying the same thing on these points. Right. So Daniel hasn't even stopped to define any of this. And so he's playing a game where he moves back and forth between terms like being and being. They're not the same being. Of course, what Sam and Jay would say is they're not the same person, but that doesn't mean that they're not the same being on a certain definition of the term being, right? So already he's setting it up to look silly when he's not really proving it silly.
Yeah, I mean, here's my comments on the issue as well, is the word monotheism that's being used. We all know that the term monotheism is a 16th century term that was used to just describe general practices that included Christians, by the way. Like, Christians were included in monotheism. But if we just pause the Greek term, for example, monotheos, the criteria for being a monotheist is just to believe that there is one theos, in Greek meaning God. All Trinitarians believe that, by the way. Like, call me crazy.
It's part of the meaning of the word.
Like, last time I checked, I thought we were monotheists because we believe in one theos. So technically, Daniel Jew, we succeed on this level, okay? And I think the main part of this debate, which was so funny because I did my reaction yesterday, the main part of the debate was confusing two categories. Number one, doxastic monotheism, and number two, ontological monotheism. So there's a difference between saying with your mouth that you believe in one God, which both Christians and Muslims say, and actually having a view that entails that your God is one in the sense that you need. Christians under Trinitarianism not only believe in God, if you go to Ephesians, but we also have a system that leads to God actually being one in essence, which is the thing that the persons share. Whereas in Islam, and this is the thing that Dyer did fantastically on when we were doing the debate, was showing that even though the Muslims like Daniel Jew and Ijaz Ahmed say it with their mouths, what actually is not the case is that their views do not lead to monotheism, but actually leads to a different kind of ontology when it comes to God. So those are my thoughts, David. Those are my thoughts, Anthony.
Yeah, in fact, so throw in something here I was thinking about earlier. David mentioned, and I'm sure it'll come up, how could it get passed over, but you mentioned, David, the fact that Muslims believe that the Quran, being Allah's speech, is therefore eternal. Allah's speech as an attribute of Allah is necessarily an eternal thing. But we know that it's not Allah. How could the Quran be Allah? No Muslim would say that, right? The Quran is decidedly distinct from Allah. Now, the question is, are they fundamentally one? Is there an essential unity between Allah's being and the Quran? Well, not if it's his attribute. If it's something distinct from the essence, then it's other than him at that level. And so, but here's what I wanted to throw in. We usually bring that up because it's perhaps the easiest for people to grasp, speaking about the Quran. But remember, that's just one of Allah's attributes. G.F. Haddad, who's a famous Muslim scholar, once wrote an article defending the eternality of the Quran. And he pointed out, he says, sometimes it's said that Muslims believe in only one eternal. And he says, that's not true. He says, we believe that there are as many eternal realities as there are names and attributes. So in other words, it's not just the Quran as Allah's speech. It's every single one of those things that you can predicate of Allah. Every single one of those are a entity. And he uses the term entity, right? Or being. So you've got multiple beings in the Islamic system. So how is Daniel... Because understand, this is not now just us returning the favor and saying, oh, look, it's just like us. Because no, this isn't just like us, right? We don't believe that the sun, for example, is this essentially different thing from the Father, right? SIIG just mentioned that we say they share the essence. So we're not affirming the same thing when we speak of a distinct son and a distinct spirit that is personally distinct.
Yeah. Bear in mind, oh, no, go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Point's made. I'm just saying that we affirm the distinction of personhood in the Trinity, their personal properties, but we're not fundamentally asserting a cleavage between them, as is necessarily the case with respect.
Don't say cleavage on when we're watching Fresh and Fit, man.
You know what I'm saying? If you say cleavage one too many times, like Myron's hairline just starts to move back just a little bit. So you have to be careful, okay? You got to be careful here. I mean, you say young too much and Daniel Jew will just pop out of somewhere. So we want to be careful on that level too. I mean, here's the problem that I see as well. I sent a thing of a TikTok I made about this. A lot of the apologetics can be sort of siphoned down into what I call Salafi bingo. And Salafi bingo is like the chef's kiss of polemics. And I think, David, you've been doing this for a long time, so you will agree. But I sent a click in the private chat. If you look at the bingo card that I made, it has every single argument that the Sunnis have used over the past 15 years. So when I was yay high, okay? They've been using this argument for a long time and they haven't changed. It's the funniest thing. So this is the same thing that Daniel does. Well, Tawhid is simple. It is very simple to believe, brother. Why would you not believe Tawhid?
Daniel doesn't talk like that, man.
No, Daniel talks like this and he moves his head this way. It's very mindful.
I'm Daniel Haqiqatjou.
I'm Daniel Haqiqatjou. David, see, David Wood, I would refute you in 5 seconds. Okay, I'm very demure. That's how he talks.
Let's hear some more from Daniel, who, by the way, to his credit, for any NAMBLA members who are watching, this is the world's leading defender of child marriage that we're listening to explain Christian theology in a way no Christian would agree with, but he's a Salafi, so he gets to.
So now we've got boobs, cleavage, kiss, child marriage. This is sounding like it fits right in with the platform.
Fits right in.
Contradiction is to admit that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are three separate gods, not just one God. This is, of course, polytheism. As Muslims, we challenge Sam and Jay to resolve this logical contradiction for the audience. Explain to us how the Father, Son, and Spirit are all one God, but they're not identical with each other, and explain it in a way that the average layperson can understand it. A layperson can understand that God is one.
Simple.
He is one.
Little side note here, but now I'm understanding why the issue of the hands is going to come up. Probably, I mean, one, you'd want to bring that up just to show that this isn't as simple as people as Muslim Dawah Gandists portray it as. But I guess an additional point is if you're saying that, Christians are saying that there's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, if they're not identical, then you're talking about separate beings. Well, applying that reasoning, if one of Allah's hands is not the same as his other hand or his other body parts, then following your reasoning, this would have to, since they're not identical to each other, therefore they have to be separate beings. I'm guessing that might be how it would come up.
Right.
But if it doesn't, then it should.
Nah. I mean, Anthony, as well, like, to comment on this before we get going, another thing as well is not just whether they're separate, which is like polytheism, but also if the way you cash this out means that Allah is a composite of different existing things. Because then the question people are going to ask is, well, if Allah is composite, surely there is a reason for why Allah is composite. There has to be something or someone that compose this entity. So now Allah has a composer. So those are the two things they need to avoid. They need to avoid multiple gods, and they need to avoid composition. They got to find that middle ground.
Let's see if he does it.
God, and he can have multiple attributes. That's Islamic monotheism. I can explain it in one sentence. Can Sam and Jay explain the Trinity without resorting to a bunch of convoluted gobbledygook?
By the way, I mean, I don't want to keep interrupting because we want to let him jump in there. But even in saying that, God and his attributes, is Allah's attribute of, let's say, wrath or justice the same as his attribute of mercy? No. Muhammad even says his mercy triumphs over his wrath. So you've got one attribute demanding one thing, a different attribute demanding another, and they're in conflict, and one triumphs over the other. So the question is Allah's attribute of wrath the same thing? Is it identical to his attribute of mercy? No. So therefore, according to Daniel, they have to be separate beings. They have to be separate, distinct beings. And so anyway, I mean, we're a minute into what he was saying, and it's like disaster after disaster after disaster.
We'll see. What Sam and Jay want to do is to try to claim that Islam's conception of God is actually just as complicated as the Trinity. This is a cheap debate tactic, as we'll see. They can't address the logical problem of the Trinity, so they want to make it seem like we have the same problem.
How's it a cheap debate tactic? If it's the Trinity versus Tawhid, which it is, then it's entirely legitimate to say, if you're saying this is a problem for us and we can show that it's true for you, then of course, right?
Sam and Jay are going, whatever methods we apply to criticize them, they're going to want to return the favor and say, if that's your methodology, here's how your own view is exposed. But that's a cheap debate tactic. We don't believe in consistency. Something like that.
Imagine two people entering into a boxing ring, and one guy swings at the other guy swings back, and he cries foul and says, "Wait a minute, he's throwing a punch at me. That's not. That's
a cheap fight trick."
Yeah,
punching back.
What world is this?
What a crybaby! Oh boy! All right, here we go.
Islam, but we don't. There is nothing analogous to the logical problem of the Trinity in Islam. For example, they might claim that Allah's attributes in Islam are incoherent. No, they're not. We can all understand how a person can have multiple attributes, how God can be all-knowing, all-powerful, merciful, loving, etc. This is not hard to understand. Those attributes of God are not separate people with their own minds, but according to the Bible, Jesus and the Father have separate knowledge. They have separate wills. For example, in Mark 13:32 in the Bible, we read, "But about that day, i.e. the day of judgment, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father." So the Son doesn't know when the day of judgment is, but the Father does know. So this indicates two separate minds. This is polytheism. There are more examples that we can cite in the rebuttal sections, but keep in mind that in the 7th century, the official position of the church in the Third Council of Constantinople, they held the position that Jesus has two wills. The church defined Jesus as having two energies.
So, stop there for a second, because he's conflating Christology with theology proper.
Triadology, yeah.
Right, and there's other problems here too, but just to narrow in on this one, he's pretending that Christians assert several wills in God because there are distinct persons. Christians believe that will is a property of nature, which is shared by the persons. So there's no necessity in saying a plurality of wills because we say a plurality of persons. But he's confusing Christology, where Christ takes on an additional nature, the hypostatic union, so that he's both God and man, where then you do have a second will being introduced. Not because as the Son, he's got a separate will from the Father, right? So he's just conflating issues, right? That'd be like saying the Trinity is an embodied being from eternity because of the incarnation. But the incarnation is not a statement about God as God in himself from eternity. It's a statement about what happens as a result of the incarnation. So he's just conflating things in order to create confusion rather than actually pointing to something that really generates, a ground for confusion.
I think the ultimate issue as well is I can't believe that this point was addressed by Jay as well. So thank God Jay was there. But he just whizzed over the fact that he said that there's three wills in the Trinity because the Father and the Son have distinct wills. Yes, the Father has his divine will and the Son has a human will, but the Son also has a divine will, like Anthony was explaining, which is identical to the Father's divine will because there's only one will within the Trinity. So since we're just focusing on the Trinity and we're not focusing on Christ's person, just the Trinity, okay, there is only one will, Daniel. Okay, I'm gonna get close to the screen so we can be really intimate here. Daniel, listen, Daniel, there's only one will. Okay, there's only one will, Daniel.
But by the way, notice that it follows from what David was pointing out about Allah's mercy and his wrath.
Yeah, so
but there seems to be competition between them, which entails a plurality of wills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the will, in other words, if you want to put it this way, the will of wrath is to punish, and the will of mercy is to forgive. And so they're in conflict, and one actually triumphs over, like Allah's attributes are in a wrestling match, and one beats the other, and mercy pins wrath. Gotcha.
This is if they try to interpret these actions as like not just, so a lot of the time they will try to interpret them as just things that Allah does. So like love is not this thing that Allah like is or something that he exists as. It's just a thing he does. So like mercy is a thing he does. Now, my question would be, if you want to interpret them as actions, for example, can the actions of Allah contradict each other or negate each other? Can Allah produce this action that is his and then produce another action that negates? You have examples of this where they have the veil of Allah, right? Allah has a veil, and Allah's sight, the glory of his face, is supposed to just burn all creation, but it doesn't burn the veil. So the veil is supposed to negate Allah's sight, like Cyclops from X-Men, right? He has to wear the glasses so that like he doesn't die. So that's the sort of thing that you could actually bring up in these discussions as well, like why Allah is like Cyclops.
Yeah. And really quickly, I mean, I imagine all these points are going to be addressed. Of course, it's a debate. Sometimes things slip under the radar. I mean, people don't have unlimited time to respond to everything. But I would throw in here real quickly, he's trying to say that the Son has, as the Son, the second person of the Trinity, a separate will, a separate mind. And here again, he brings in the statement about Jesus not knowing the day or the hour, which one might say is explained in terms of the hypostatic union by virtue of taking human nature upon himself. And that is a way that Christians have, in many respects, answered this. Other Christians, though, and this is the approach that I would take, have pointed out that the term for know is used in a variety of ways in Scripture. It says, for example, in Genesis, Adam knew his wife Eve and she conceived and bore a son. That doesn't mean Adam had intellectual apprehension of her and that resulted in her pregnancy. That's absurd, right? In Amos, the Lord says, "You only have I known among all the families of the earth." Clearly, he's not saying he doesn't have intellectual knowledge of them. This refers to a loving disposition towards them. But there's another way that's often overlooked by people. Part of it is because they don't see the Hebrew idiom. In the Hebrew, it's translated, and the translators are aiding us here and sort of smoothing it over. But sometimes in the text of Scripture, when it's talking about something being made known by God or men, what it literally says is, I know this, or I don't know this. But the idea is, I'm making this known to you, or I'm not making this known to you. So here's a clear example. Paul in 1 Corinthians 2, he's not writing in Hebrew, but he's a Hebrew thinker. He says, I determined to know nothing among you except Christ and him crucified. what is Paul saying there? I don't know who my mother is. I don't know where Jerusalem is. I forgot that I learned at the feet of Gamaliel. Is that what Paul's saying? Or is he saying, I resolve to make nothing known to you, dolts in Corinth, who are acting like a bunch of buffoons, anything but that one thing that you need to hear about. Christ died for sinners, and so forth. So there's a sense in which the term know means to make known. And the context in the Olivet Discourse is Jesus talking about his return. He says, nobody knows that day. And his return is his coming as the groom for his bride. He goes on to tell parables about wise and unwise virgins who weren't prepared for the long haul and so forth. So he's clearly talking about the coming of the groom for the bride. Well, the reason that's interesting is because in a Jewish context, it was the father's prerogative in a betrothal. The children would be betrothed to each other. It was a father's prerogative to openly or publicly declare the day. Nobody else had that prerogative. It didn't mean nobody else knew it. The son would know when he's going to go get his bride. These things were known. How is the bride going to be ready, and so forth? So it was the father's prerogative to declare it. And that's the point that Jesus is making, I would maintain. Now, again, but that's just one way Christians have approached this. But
there are
back to Daniel here. Back to Daniel, he's bringing up things that are sort of off the track of the Trinity, because if nothing else, it's a statement that Jesus is making within the context of the hypostatic union. And so it's illicit if Jesus speaks from the context of that hypostatic union of having a distinct will or growing in wisdom or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, but like, Anthony, that's all gobbledygook. Like, all you just said is gobbledygook. That's why you're wrong.
Yeah, you have to use lots of words to explain stuff, so it can't be true. If
I could have said
it's
all
gobbledygook. It's all gobbledygook.
Yeah. Couple issues there. So one, I mean, even in the passage that Daniel cites, you've got Jesus saying, of that day or hour, no one knows, talking about human beings, not even the angels, not even the Son. It's interesting that in this hierarchy he establishes, he's at the top. He's at the top of these things. So that's interesting. And it's the Son and the Father there. So it's interesting if Muslims want to believe that this passage is authentic. You've got Father and Son right there. So that's one interesting thing, that Jesus is at the top of all of this. He's even above the angels in the passage that Daniel is citing to show that the doctrine of Jesus is somehow incoherent.
It's very high.
So you've got that. Another issue which often gets overlooked is Muslims tend to think that Christians are just changing their scripture to bring it in line with their theology. And when they bring up passages that they say, see, this refutes your theology, and then Christians are forced to actually have to explain it to them. Think about this from an Islamic perspective. And I'm saying this because the very next section of the debate is about to be on the preservation of the scriptures. And Muslims believe that we're just changing our scriptures to bring it in line with our theology. Actually, guys, if you think this is a theological problem for Christian theology, why didn't Christians change that?
We had the whole Bible. Like, people say that like we took out or we added things in, like the pericope or adultery, which, by the way, we have fathers of the church like Pacian of Barcelona, who is contemporaneous to the scribes who wrote the Codex Sinaiticus. So he had earlier scripts than them. Okay. We have people that say that we take these things out and we add things in. Yeah. Do you not think that if this was a problem for us, we could just yeet this out of the book? We could have just taken it out of the book, okay, and then just like removed it, like the Boko Haram book that I have here, right? But we didn't, because it wasn't a problem. And
this reminds me.
Go ahead.
Oh, I thought you were done. But it reminds me of something I saw the other day. I was surprised, knowing what I do with Bart Ehrman, to see this comment. So Ehrman is making this point that the reason we have the four Gospels that we do, and by the way, there's an excellent book on the four Gospels and the antiquity of them as accepted within the canon by Charles Hill. Excellent, phenomenal, goes through the history, really good book. But what Ehrman says is the reason that these are the books we have, as opposed to some of the other Gospels that eventually came along after the first century is because the proto-Orthodox are the ones who are in control of the history, right? So he's saying the proto-Orthodox, by which he means the party that
Christians.
became ascendant, right? Before they had the dominance, they were there along with a bunch of other competing Christianities. This is what Ehrman claims.
Yeah.
They eventually get the ascendancy, and so that's why these books get retained and
Pushed
the other
up.
ones get excluded. But notice this. He's saying it's the proto-Orthodox that chose these books. So they liked these books, according to Ehrman. But if you look at Ehrman's other works, like his book on how Jesus became God, he argues that they don't all teach the high view of Jesus that the church, the proto-Orthodox, held to. It's his claim that Mark doesn't teach a high Christology, Matthew and Luke kind of upgrade the Jesus of Mark, and then John goes off the rails and makes Jesus God. So there's this evolution. Right. Well, put this together. Ehrman's saying the proto-Orthodox chose these Gospels because they fit their theology, but then he turns around in his other book and says they don't all teach the same Christology. So, but it's the same thing that Daniel and Ijaz are doing, and all Muslims do. When it's the Bible supports my theology here, it's true, it's valid, Jesus didn't know he has two wills, blah, blah, blah. And then, oh, by the way, your scriptures have been corrupted to make it match your theology.
There's actually a great book that you could get from this as well. Hold on.
And so, so the issue, we can't hear you, dude. You got to get closer.
No, it's okay. I was coming back. This
All right.
great book that you can get, okay? This is by Christoph Marschis, okay? This got forced into my supervisor's hands. This book actually goes through Christian theology, its institutions in the early Roman Empire. If you really want to think about how Christianity worked pre and post Constantine, how Christianity already had an institutional system of preserving the text of the Bible and preserving its teachings, which includes the Bible, by the way. If you want to know about that, please read this book. It's great for getting into the German scholarship on the matter. I'm going to just leave it on my bed because I don't care about it. So that's something that you can look into.
Yeah. So, takeaway, ladies and gentlemen, Muslims really seem to have an issue here that they haven't thought through. Namely, when the Bible agrees with basic Christian theology, then Muslims say, you corrupted that. You changed that to bring it in line with your theology. Then they'll use passages from the Bible to say, hey, this doesn't line up with Christian theology. It's like, okay, wait, if you believe that we were freely changing that as we went along, why didn't they change that? Either because they didn't see that as a conflict with it, or because they just weren't changing the Bible. They believe that the Bible is the standard, and so on. So anyway, so that's an issue. One more issue. I don't know if this is going to come up, but since Daniel is saying, hey, he explained that the Father and Son have to be two separate gods because, according to his interpretation of Mark 13:32, they're not the same. They can't be the same because one has different knowledge than the other has. Now, think about this. We read in the Muslim sources about all kinds of passages of the Quran being abrogated. So the eternal Quran has these passages. They are the Quran. They were revealed as the Quran, but they get abrogated, and some of the abrogated verses are still in the Quran. They're in the Quran that we have today, but they've been abrogated. Some of them are actually removed from the Quran. They're removed from the Quran. That would mean that the heavenly Quran contains knowledge that the earthly Qurans do not have. And you have differences in earthly Qurans where they'll say different things. You have the different qira'at. So they actually say different things. So some of the various Qurans contain information that is not contained in other versions of the Quran. And therefore, they would have to be fundamentally different Qurans and fundamentally different speech of Allah, right? So they're different. So they can no longer, following what Daniel's saying, they cannot say there's one Quran, right? Because they want to say keep in mind what they want to say. There's one, the Quran is one in what? Essence or being or whatever, but more than one in ahruf and more than one in qiraat, but it's all just somehow what? You can't do that because now you have some Qurans contain different knowledge than others, and therefore by Daniel's own reasoning, would have to be fundamentally different Qurans. And therefore, he's just destroyed the Islamic claims about the Quran. All right, let's jump back into this, see where he's going with this.
And two wills, one divine and one human. Two separate wills means two separate minds. This means that Jesus and the Father have two separate minds and are therefore two separate entities. You either explain this by admitting it is polytheism, or you have to give us some convoluted explanation of how two minds or three minds are still one God. There's nothing analogous to this in Islamic theology. Islam says there's one God. He has knowledge, he has will, one knowledge. These things are not divided between multiple persons or energies or anything like that. And all of this Islamic monotheism is clearly expressed in the Quran, by the way. Contrast this with the Bible. Clearly. Jesus is meant to be God, all-knowing, and the only teacher to the disciples, but the Jesus of the Gospels doesn't describe the doctrines of the Trinity. We have to rely on Paul and the church fathers to explain what the Trinity is. That's strange. Paul. If God wants us to know him, believe.
Cool. So it doesn't come later. It comes from Paul. Thank you. So it is first century. Thank you, Daniel.
In him, lay the foundation for a general understanding of him. Why would he leave that to different authors at different times and different places over several centuries, such that when God is finally described in Scripture, it results in a mystery, and we need all these church councils to figure it out. The way that Christians have come to understand.
Yeah, guys, everyone who's watching, this goes back to what Anthony was talking about. Look at what Daniel's saying. Oh, and they need church councils to try and figure this out. I mean, in Islam, they were fighting wars over theology, right?
Exactly. Over this very issue. So,
hey, I mean, I'd rather sit down and talk with my boy rather than just stab the guy. I'm just saying. Call me crazy, right? I mean, why do you think I have to wear the mask? Because as soon as I take this off, my blood might be halal. That's what I'm saying. I don't want my blood to be halal, but hey, it might be possible. But by the way, he quoted the Third Council of Constantinople, which is 680. Okay, now the Third Council of Constantinople, at least in the Acta, there are 17 different times where they assert that the Trinity's will is inseparable. Like they specifically use the word not separable, because although the persons are distinct, they cannot be separated. Even the two natures of Christ, the two wills of Christ, they can never be separated. They are different, yes, distinct, but they are not separate, Daniel. I don't know why he allowed this argument to get through, because you surely think, David, like before the debate happens, you'd think that like Daniel Haqiqatjou is sitting there in like a smoky room, and he's got all the Dyers just sitting there around him. Like they're sitting like this, planning on how they're going to use the internet to bring dawah to Islam. You know, they're going to bring the argument of Islam to the nation on the internet, on the Boob podcast, Fresh and Fit. They're going to do it really well. And you see Jake the Muslim on the right-hand side. That's his right-hand man. You got Muhammad Hijab at the head of the table. You have Ali Dyer on the left-hand side. And he's saying, brothers, I'm going to bring this argument. Is this argument correct on the Christian theology? That the two natures are separate wills, separate. Jake the Muslim, who's read this, by the way, Jake the Muslim says, of course, brother, this is correct. This is their orthodox opinion. So the fact that this got through the vetting is crazy to me. I'm not going to lie to you guys. It's insane.
Yeah, they're not tactical geniuses. Let's just say that.
Trinity is what we'd expect if God did.
Well, I was going to say, and I'm sure there's plenty of opportunity to bring this in, because there's no way this is not going to be further discussed. But he says that it took, all sorts of discussion, many centuries and so forth for Christians. You lightly smacked that. You said they were fighting wars over these things. I mean, this is well known, and I have a hard time thinking that Daniel doesn't know about some of this, which makes this, suspect in terms of, character, but that's irrelevant, really. The fact is, though, that they did differ over these things. In fact, I have a quote here I pulled up when he said that from Theodore Noldik, and there's quotes like this for days, but he's talking about controversies in the early history of Islam. He says, another controversy, so notice another controversy, this is a different one than the others he's talking about in context, had reference to the divine attributes. The Quran, in its unsophisticated anthropomorphism, attributes human qualities to God throughout. The original Muslims took this up simply, notice simply, as it was written, But later, many others were stumbled by this, and then he goes on talking about how these groups, went at each other, and hence the history of the warfare between what I would call the attributists and the anti-attributists. There's other terms that are used for them in Islamic context, but I think this helps people to see this controversy. There were those who said Allah has actual attributes other than his essence, and then there were those who said no, he doesn't. Allah is simply one. Now, what's interesting is when you look at the arguments back and forth between these guys, what's interesting is how they argued and what they thought of the other side. Those who affirmed that Allah had attributes were called polytheists by their counterparts. Right? The Mu'tazili, who were the Islamic rationalists, those were the ones who believed in reason, right? The priority of reason. So Daniel wants to pretend his position is rational, but it was the rationalists in the history of Islam who opposed this. And they called Daniel's position polytheism because he asserts the existence of a plurality of eternal entities in addition to Allah's essence. And then on the other side, those who affirm that Allah has attributes called the other party negators, or in effect, they're calling them, almost atheists. They're saying you're denying Allah by denying his attributes. So take your pick. According to the Muslims, you're either a polytheist or an atheist if you believe Allah has attributes or don't believe that he does. Neither one of those sounds like the pure monotheism that Daniel pretends he has. And it gets even worse the more you get into this, because of course Daniel doesn't just believe Allah has attributes. He thinks he has eyes, ears, hands, feet, and so forth.
He also has like a loincloth as well. They're like the womb, like does that?
It's not just a loincloth. That's the Muslims try to butcher the translation. It says he has loins, but he does have a loincloth.
Yeah, and guys, just think about this, because we wouldn't bring it up as an objection that you guys had to have theological discussions or debates afterwards to try and come up with like official formulations of doctrines. We wouldn't be, aha, you guys had to discuss your theology. That's what Daniel just did, right? So since he just did that, it never crosses their minds to say, here's the standard I just used against Christianity. How would Islam also fare against that standard? Because, keep in mind, if he wants to say, it's in the Bible that there's Father and there's Son and there's Holy Spirit and that there's one God, and so Christians later have to discuss how they're going to define this doctrine. But if they have to discuss and define it, this just shows that it's absurd and it's made up later. Okay, and he says that's not like the Quran with Tawhid. Bull, Daniel. Absolutely bull. If you just read the Quran, do you conclude that the Quran had a beginning or that it is eternal? You don't. You have to debate that later and give your reasons for saying these things, right? You have to say, okay, well, we can't say that all of a sudden one day, this would be the reason, we can't just say that one day Allah started speaking and that he never spoke before that, because then it would be like he changed over time or something like that. And so you end up with these kinds of issues. The point is you've got what the Quran says, and people who believe that the Quran had a beginning, believe in that Quran, and people who don't believe that the Quran had a beginning also believe in that Quran. They have to debate it, and they eventually, of course, fight over it. But following his reasoning, hey, since the Quran isn't like crystal clear on whether the Quran is eternal, and later Muslims have to debate and even fight over that, therefore it's all made up. It's all made up, and Islam is just incoherent, and we can't trust the doctrine of Tawhid. Because keep in mind what you're doing with the eternality of the Quran, and how you're saying that something can be eternal or it has a beginning. That all relates to the doctrine of Tawhid, and Muslims had to disagree and have councils and fight over this sort of thing. And so I don't know what you do here. It's just, it never enters their mind. Let me be consistent with my criticism. Here's a criticism I'm criticizing them with. How would this work against Islam? Because it always seems to work against Islam. But let's let him finish up his little section here.
Not reveal the doctrines of the Trinity. On the other hand, the God in the Quran revealed 4 short lines that any human being can read and instantly understand who God is and what his attributes are. This is exactly what we would expect from an all-knowing, wise, just, merciful, and loving God who cares about his creation. The 4 lines are the 112th chapter of the Quran. Say he is God, one God,
One
Allah,
of?
the completely self-sufficient. He neither begets nor is born, nor is there to him any equivalent. Thank you.
Okay, what did that explain about Allah's attributes? Whether they are distinct entities, or what did it say about the Quran being eternal? All these issues that are very significant to Tawhid. What did those say about it? I mean, that would be like me saying, oh, but the Bible says there's one God. So see, there you go.
You see the proof, brother. The proof is very clear, brother. Let's be honest. Okay.
The irony here is Daniel's presenting Surah 112, Surah Al-Ikhlas, as the go-to text for proving Tawhid and showing how simple and clear it is in the Quran. If I was asked by somebody to go somewhere in the Quran to show the absurdity of it, the incoherence, the falsity of it, I would go to Surah 112. That's like the thing that immediately comes to mind for a number of reasons. And for days we could talk about this, but as David, I think he said at one point, I think when Daniel was talking, you mentioned that the phrase used there is not Allah, say Allah is one, but one of, right? There's at least a grammatical issue there. The grammar in the Arabic isn't precise. There's a problem. It doesn't literally say Allah is one. It says Allah is one of. One of what? That assumes a plurality, not an absolute unity. But the other thing is, in the second verse, it says, say he is Allah the Eternal. That's the way it's sometimes translated. I challenge people, go online, go to islamawakened.com, for example, and look. It has like 50 different translations there. Look at the incredible variety in the translations. They don't all render it the same way. There's something wrong here. That's what this alerts you to. So for example, one way that it's translated sometimes is eternal. Say he's Allah the Eternal. Other ways that it's translated is he's the eternally besought. Now, think about it. Eternal and eternally besought are not the same thing. Okay, to be besought is to be implored, right? You're seeking out this individual. Are there other beings around to seek Allah out from all eternity? That sounds like polytheism to me if you take that literally. But it's still not the same thing as saying that Allah is eternal. It's a whole different idea. Now, when you go through all these different definitions, you end up with different ideas. But here's what's interesting. If you look at what's the name of the guy who did the Al-Tabari, the famous history. Al-Tabari. He has a discussion of this verse and the meaning of the word samad there for eternal. And he points out that the Islamic authorities are all in disagreement over the meaning of this word. However, if you look at the chains, the one that goes back to Muhammad would be the strongest, he says, if it's valid. And what does Muhammad say is the meaning of the term according to that chain? He says it means solid, meaning Allah has no void, no cavity. Now, notice how this fits two things about this in the context. According to the occasion of revelation for this surah, this surah was given in response to the pagans asking Muhammad, what is your God made of? So they're explicitly asking if Allah has some kind of substance, and they're asking him to tell them what it is. But also, Muhammad says in connection with this in the surah, Allah doesn't beget nor is he begotten. So now think about how this fits. If Allah is solid, he has no cavity, right?
He doesn't have any air that someone can pass through.
There's no ability for Allah to have a child. And it would answer the question if Allah is made of something that's put to Muhammad by the pagans. Now, and I'm not just saying this sort of thing as, my own clever idea or something. If you look at early Muslims, I have the quotes right here. If you want me to read them, I will. But of Muslims talking about how much of Allah is solid and how much is hollow, because according to them, you have to say he's solid because of this verse. So some would say he's solid from the waist down, so he doesn't beget because he doesn't have the ability to beget. He's solid from the waist down. I'll let you fill in the picture there. But they didn't want to say that he's solid from the waist up because they at least had to say he had a chest cavity. How else could he speak? He's a speaking being, so he has to have a chest cavity. right? But then others would say, no, it's from the, just above the stomach down because Allah doesn't eat. That's what it means to say Allah doesn't eat food. He doesn't digest it. He doesn't excrete it. Right? So the early Muslims were actually talking about this passage in light of this notion that it means solid. And furthermore, notice when it goes on at the end of the surah, it says, there's nothing like him. What is it saying there? Because the way Muslims use this is they think it's making a statement, a metaphysical statement about the quality of Allah's being. So that when you say Allah has hands, they can say, oh, they're not like the hands of any other being. But the other time that this sort of statement is found is in Surah 42:11, where it says there's nothing like Allah. But what's going on in the context? It says that Allah provided a mate for everything. So everything has its counterpart. Every male has its female. But unlike them, Allah doesn't have a female counterpart. That's what it means to say there's nothing like Allah. He doesn't have a lucky lady, right? That's why Allah doesn't beget and isn't begotten, because he's solid and he doesn't have a woman that found him attractive. The surah is not saying anything that looks like what Daniel thinks it's talking about.
But let's say like we interpret this with Aqidah, right? Because this is something very important that's brought up. And although the context, as Anthony notes, doesn't even seem to derive this, it doesn't matter because these two, on the right, Daniel Haqiqatjou is a Salafi, Athari, and on the left, Ijaz is a Maturidi. So as a Maturidi, he specifically interprets the attributes of Allah differently. When we see hands, he does not think that there is a thing in reality that exists called hands that is different from Allah's power. Whereas Daniel Haqiqatjou, he thinks that the attribute of Allah's power is not only different from his attribute of creating somehow, but is also different from the hands that he uses to create. So there are these real things that can be in time and space because Allah is able to create Adam specifically with his hands in time, as well as the fact that he's able to descend in all of these things. Those two creeds are not the same. But when he says that this idea is clear, there is also the idea of, as we pointed out before, the Bila Cave principle. Now, the Bila Cave principle is this idea that whatever Allah says about himself, we just affirm it without thinking too deeply, without asking how this thing exists. And there are two specific types of the Bila Cave principle, which is Tawhid al-Ma'na of Tawhid and Tawhid al-Kayfiyya. So Tawhid al-Ma'na in Arabic refers to not knowing the reality. So we just don't know what it is. We don't know what it is in any sense. Whereas Tawhid al-Kayfiyya says, oh no, we know what it is. We know what it is. But we just don't know how it is. We don't know how it does the thing. We don't know the modality. So for Daniel Haqiqatjou, he thinks that we do know that there is a hand. And we do know the definition of hand for Allah. But every time you ask him, he won't be able to tell you. Because any entity he thinks of, any definition he thinks of will be a created definition. And Allah has to be completely, and I'm going to be even slower here, completely dissimilar to that. He can't be identical to whatever definition Daniel Haqiqatjou presents. So even the attribute of Allah being one, Ahad, any idea that Daniel thinks about in his head will be wrong. So if he thinks Allah is just a singular entity, the way that we are as created singular entities, Allah can't be that. So we don't even know what these attributes even mean. We're in a much more unclear place because at least Christians believe that there is an analogy of being between humanity and God, between creations and God. God is one in a similar way that creatures are, just not exactly the same. Dyer affirms this point. Sam Shamoun affirms this point. David Wood above me affirms this point. Anthony affirms this point. All Christians affirm this point. But Daniel Jew, he cannot articulate what oneness for Allah specifically means without using a creature. So every single thing that you attribute to Allah, in Daniel's view, you cannot know in any sense what it is because you are using created ideas. And those can't be Allah.
And it is a bit of a problem. I'm wondering which of this is going to pop up. Take a couple super chats real quick, and then we'll see how the Christian side responds. My jizya for the destroyers of Dawa. Loved how you crashed Speaker's Corner and collabed with the UK apologists routing the Dawa Gandis. Yeah, that was a fun day. So SIIIG is one of the guys who's holding it down regularly, and me and Anthony got to show up one day with some others, and fun times. Super, super fun times. Fun place. Did Daniel just loose the shin of Allah at the beginning? Such a sad day for Islam. It is indeed. Shame on Daniel. Apostate of Allah says, I love when Muslims think they can Christians what Christians tell Christians what Christians really believe. Pure comedy to me. Yeah, it is. Let's see. We have Isa here. Christianity is monotheism. We all know this. And that's from our friendly Jewish Muslim friend, Isa.
That's what we need to start doing in these debates. Just start off, Christianity's monotheism. There's no question there. All Christians agree. Now, as for the absurdity of Tawhid, let's talk about this.
Yeah, that's how we should. Yep. We all. Everyone agrees. Guys, that's how to do the next debate, ladies and gentlemen. Just Christian starts off and says, "Okay, everyone agrees that the doctrine of the Trinity is pure monotheism. Let's talk about the problems with Tawhid." And then just jump right into it, because that's what these guys do. That's what these guys do in reverse. Merck says, "Yo, SIIIG, refute the Salafi Athari essence and body distinction."
Oh yeah. Okay. Should I try? Okay, I'm gonna try to do this as quickly as I can. Can they hear this? Okay, they can.
Yeah.
Okay, so listen, guys. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do this very, very quickly. Okay. They believe that the Dat of Allah is different from the Sifat of Allah. Some of the Sifat of Allah are the body parts of Allah, such as the hand, such as the shin, such as the foot. The problem with this is that every single attribute of Allah with these body parts exists. They also have a property of existence that is particular to those specific things. And because they are all distinct, real, uncreated, eternal existences that are all necessary, then you have a multitude of distinct, uncreated, eternal, and necessary beings, existences. Therefore, this leads to a multitude of necessary beings, which is a multitude of gods. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for my TED Talk. I appreciate you guys. Thank you. There you go.
Now we have Snudgewick. Praise the Lord, brothers. We have JG. Tawhid is also Trinity, but in reverse. Tawhid is unifying that which is plural into singular, and Trinity. And yeah, I mean the word, as Anthony pointed out, the word means unification, right? You pointed that out, right? Yeah, it means unification. Yeah. So it sounds like you're unifying something that is plural. Yob here says, "Is Allah gay?" Well, no, but according to some sources, Muhammad would be, unless you're talking about theologically.
He might
mean theologically here.
He might be playing off of the fact that Allah hasn't found any woman suitable to him.
Oh, yeah.
But
technically, wouldn't Allah be asexual?
He's got the gonads though, so.
Well,
so he's gay.
That was that was funny. It was one of the OGs, Venom Fang X. He's one of the early guys who jumped on YouTube, but he had a 2-part series. Everyone loves Allah, but in the first one, Allah walks into his house, and he's carrying a briefcase, and he sets his briefcase down, and he goes, "Honey, I'm home. Oh wait, I have no partner." And the audience goes, "Aww." That was funny.
Do you know what it is? Maybe there's also the idea of the fact that when you have a partner in Islam, like the partner needs to satisfy the other, right? So for Christians in matrimony, we give ourselves in matrimony, which is great. But in Islam, it's like there's like a satisfactory principle that the spouse is supposed to satisfy like the husband, for example, okay? In Islam, since Allah is infinite, he has an infinite desire for himself. He has an infinite desire for a spouse. There's never going to be a created spouse that would fully satisfy Allah. So like there would never be able to satisfy the infinite thing that Allah would want with the spouse. I'm not saying he's going to do. I'm just saying he wouldn't be able to satisfy infinitely. You guys can fill in the blanks. I'm not saying anything, okay? Whatever you're thinking of, that's you. That's you. I'm not saying anything, guys, okay? Don't get me cancelled. That's the way that you could think about that. Anthony, what do you think?
I'm thinking, gosh, all this innuendo before they've even gotten to the morality part of the debate.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure the fireworks fly there.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh, let's get into it.
Yeah, we have the triggered Christian here says, destroy this argument with the triple point. So yeah, I'm guessing you're talking about the triple point in water, but there is a temperature and pressure of water where you have water in its solid, liquid, and gaseous state all at once. So keep in mind, guys, we're not saying that is the Trinity or significantly like the Trinity. These are all, with the analogies, you're usually making a point about how something is one in one sense and more than one in another sense, since that's what lots of the Muslim objections revolve around. And so there are examples you can give to show that that's silly. Don't Muslims think it's suspicious that nobody has heard from Allah since Muhammad died? Well, that's an interesting little side issue, because Muslims will point out that Muhammad is the seal of the prophet, so Muhammad's last. But when you go to the Muslim sources, it's because Allah sent someone to every area of the world, and so every area of the world had its messenger in that language. So the idea in the Quran is each person needs a book or a revelation or prophet in their own language. And so once Muhammad came, officially, according to the Quran, every group from every language had its own prophet. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, new languages have come along since that was revealed. So in theory, you would need more prophets. And so the Islamic position is just incoherent.
What about dialects?
The simple answer is when you've got a puppet and it stops talking, when the guy with his arm up it dies, it's because the puppet wasn't really talking, right? It was the guy holding the puppet. Well, Muhammad, Allah's his sock puppet, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Indeed, indeed.
You know what the crazy thing is, David, before we even continue, this is the last thing I'm going to say, then we're going to continue. With that idea with the prophet, it needs to be sent to every single nation. Doesn't that include dialects for these guys, right? Because it could be such different dialects. So doesn't that mean that God would need to send the prophet to people in Texas, people in Alabama, people on Sentinel Island? I'm just saying, wouldn't you need to send the prophet to Liverpool? Because I can't even understand what the guys in Liverpool say half the time. I'm not gonna lie.
I can't understand what half the guys in those movies like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and stuff. It's and also you got my something that over someone the same when going to run around the railroad. It's like, what the heck are you babbling about, man? Anyway.
I don't understand what you Americans say. You guys all sound like you come from California and you speak like this. I don't understand.
Yeah, even Arabic. I have I forget which country it was, but I had Muslims from Saudi Arabia saying we don't understand what those guys are saying. I think from Morocco or something like that. Or is it Algeria? I forget. They were saying we don't understand what these guys are saying, even though they're supposedly speaking our same language.
You didn't send us the Somali prophet.
Yeah. Mo here says, D. Wood, I wish you shared your views on God, Jesus, and prophecies and doctrines. You look more like a Muslim than a Christian, since you speak more of Islam than Christ, meaning your mind's full of Allah instead of Jesus. Yeah, nice try. Nice try, Mo. hey, let me, my next to last video that I just posted was Elon Musk just confirmed these 2 Bible predictions. And on the thumbnail, prophecies fulfilled. You go back to my channel. What are the videos on my channel? Go back to the beginning. First video, Jesus, the Son of God. Next video, the comedian who laughed his way to Jesus. Then me making fun of the Babylon Bee. Then why Elvis's final thoughts were about Jesus. Then how God destroyed my atheism. Then Jordan Peterson on the Christian origins of science. David just talked about Islam. That's all he talks about. Why is he talking about Islam? Come on, grow up, man. Stop embarrassing yourself. They love to come with something that they saw. Oh, this will work. This worked on Twitter. David just talks about Islam. Oh.
No, they took Muhammad Hijab's course and they think that they're so strong mentally.
Yeah.
Of course.
Powerful.
You know the problem is though, I hate my comment section because they say that I sound like him because of my UK accent. Guys, bear in mind, okay, Muhammad Hijab is 32. I don't sound like this, brother. I don't speak with authority like this. Yeah, the trajectory continues as it is. I would choose the cow.
I'm sorry.
Heisenberger here says, IP noted in one of his videos that Jesus, HP not knowing the hour is explained by knowing the cultural context, which means the Father has sovereignty. Anthony already did a discussion of this. Jamius here says, hi guys, quick question. Why isn't the argument that when inserting Aramaic dots to early Quranic manuscripts reveal Christian hymns talked about more? Well, you do have people talking about the underlying sources of the Quran. Their entire books written on the sources of the Quran. This is a bit different here, but got some. My goodness, I can make like 100 videos out of this. It's called the Quran and the Bible, but it's basically going through the original sources of lots of the stories in the Quran. Lots of good stuff there. And hey, we got Mo again. He says, Bible truly teach Trinity or just misunderstanding? Other views on divine family? Is Jesus Father and Son and equal to time? How it work with Jesus' words on divine hierarchy? By the way, not a Muslim here. Come on, Mo. You're the one who just raised the objection that all I ever talk about on this channel that's loaded with Christian videos is all I ever talk about Islam. So you've been exposed, Mo. All right, now let's go ahead and jump in to see how the Christians respond to this powerful Dawah argument. Keep in mind, guys, every Muslim from the Dawah camp, at least from the Dawah fans, were just watching Daniel going, he ended Christianity, he destroyed it, because they have the same problems with as Daniel has, namely, never crosses their minds to be consistent or honest about what their own teachings are. And I'm guessing that's going to come up. And I'm guessing the Muslims are going to flip out about it and not like it.
All right. Still got roughly 30 seconds on the clock, but I'll end it there. I will turn
Daniel
it to
was
team
silenced. He didn't even use his
Christianity.
time.
We'll put another 5 minutes on the clock for you guys.
Daniel didn't even have enough criticisms of the Trinity to last 5 minutes. You see, they have nothing.
I mean,
Huh? What's that?
You see the proof, brother. He couldn't even
the proof.
last 5 minutes in the ring with me. Look at my muscles, boy. Look at my muscles. You couldn't last 5 minutes in the ring with me. You couldn't last 5 minutes in an intellectual debate with me, Daniel. By the way, I don't speak like this. I speak very normal. Like, just stop. Okay.
We know what you're doing.
Way to go, you go.
Either way, go ahead.
So, okay, let me go. Okay.
All right, timer's on.
Ready? All right. Praise be the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the one true God. And glory to the Son of God who became flesh for our salvation. May the Lord Jesus be magnified and the falsehood of Tawhid exposed. Now, notice what Daniel did. Instead of focusing on what it means for Allah to be one, he spent the bulk of his time criticizing the Trinity, but we will answer his objections in a rebuttal period, but I'm now going to turn against him.
Oh, he's going to turn it against them. Shocker. Daniel laid down a bunch of rules that, if applied consistently, would destroy Islam, but it never crosses Daniel's mind to apply them consistently. And now a Christian has to come along and do it for him.
Daniel said you can't do that.
Yeah. It's a cheap... And Christians use these cheap debate tricks where once we apply a methodology and a standard, then they say, okay, let's see how your theology... let's see how that works with your standard and your methodology. Shameful debate tactics holding us consistent with our own methodology.
See, frankly, the Christians aren't able to even make the argument. Frankly, Yanni, I don't understand. The argument, frankly, doesn't really work. Okay, we've applied a standard, and you cannot use the standard that we apply for ourselves because we are Muslim. You understand, brother? Honestly, it's just a tukokwe. It's a fallacy. Look at them. Look at Sam Shamoun. Look at his bald head. How could he possibly answer the questions on the Trinity without using gobbledygook? Why was he even in the ring with us? Come on.
By the way,
this is the level.
By the way, it's actually oddly parallel to like the sort of society that these guys want to build, like where we're their dhimmis and we don't get to talk back to them, and so they can have a society where they're on top and we're all second-class citizens and we all have to keep our mouths shut, and so you have different rules for them and for us. That's what they want, but they want it in theology and apologetics too. It's like, here's all the rules and you guys have to shut up and take this. And you don't get to tell us what to do. You don't get to hold us accountable for anything. You're beneath us. This is just hilarious stuff. Well, let's see what Sam's got here.
Because not so fast. When he says he believes in Tawhid, what exactly does it mean for Allah to be one? Because I'm aware that Daniel does believe the fact that the Quran is uncreated. And therefore, we now have two distinct eternal entities that are not identical. Why? Because I'm going to show Daniel from his authentic sources, Sahih narrations, that the Quran and the chapters of the Quran actually will intercede and debate with Allah. So now we have a paradox. Because if the Quran is the speech of Allah and that's Allah speaking, is Allah speaking to himself? So is Daniel actually a modalist? Or is he a polytheist? Or does he have a form of Trinity? But his is even worse because it's not three persons, because each chapter of the Quran has a potentiality of speaking with Allah. So that means his God consists of at least 115 divine persons or divine beings who can interact with one another and appear separately. And this is
I think because he said 115. I think so. What Sam is saying, I'm guessing he's going to unpack this because you've got the sources, but the Quran. So Allah speaks out the Quran from all eternity, and then you have the Quran. But the Quran also appears in the form of a pale man and then intercedes. So he's talking to Allah, going, "Hey Allah, let me tell you about this guy." So wait, that's Allah's speech speaking to who? To Allah.
Right.
So Allah. So is that Allah speaking to himself, or do you believe that this is some sort of separate being? And then what Sam is pointing out there as well is that, as I mentioned earlier, you've got the hadith about the individual chapters of the Quran appearing as flocks of birds, but they appear to intercede. They're there to intercede. So they're also saying, Allah, Allah. So let's say it's Surah 3 talking. Surah 3 appears as a flock of birds and starts saying, Allah, this person did this person did that, this person recited me this number of times, and Allah's going, oh, wow, that's great. So wait a minute, that's part of Allah's speech in the Quran speaking back to him. Is this Allah speaking to himself, or is that a separate being now that is, so what's going on here? And so Sam added up 114 chapters of the Quran. They each speak for themselves, but they also speak as one unified Voltron Quran that's made up of all the parts. Yeah, that speaks to you as well. And so he did the math, 115. That's 115 separate personalities. And so you either believe that Allah is all those personalities, in which case Allah's talking to himself like he's crazy, or you believe that they're separate beings. But guess what? These are all eternal. And so now you have a bunch of eternal separate beings. Long story short, Islamic theology of the Quran, at least as understood by these guys, is way more complicated than they let on. And using the standards that Daniel just used against the Trinity, they're polytheists. Because guys, keep in mind, what he said was, if the Father has knowledge that the Son does not have, then they're two separate beings. Okay. If Surah 2 speaks and Surah 3 speaks, is there knowledge in Surah 2 that is not in Surah 3? Therefore, they have to be separate beings. They're separate beings, and they're separate persons, because they're speaking and arguing with Allah and pleading with Allah and interceding with Allah. And so,
bear in mind. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I'm just saying it's guys. They always do this. Oh, it's so simple in Islam. We only have one Quran, perfectly preserved, and it's a lie. And look, our theology is so simple and easier. You're lying. You're lying. It's not. Your theology is massively confusing, and any standards that you're using right now against Christians, if they flipped it back on you, you end up with incoherent nonsense, and you have to be polytheist by your own definition and by your own standard. And so what Muslims want is this world where they just go around and they're attacking Christianity and no one ever applies it. Matter of fact, guys, if you want to, why dawah is falling apart right now. Why dawah is falling apart right now is back when dawah was really getting moving in the West. Back in like the 80s and 90s with people like Ahmed and so on, people there weren't able to say, okay, here's your standard, let me apply it to Islam. They didn't know about Islam. So the dawah guys were able to get away with this for a long time. Now, all of a sudden, right now, what's going on in the world right now and why dawah is absolutely crumbling is you've got people who do know about Islam, and everything the dawah guys have been trained all their lives to say as a refutation of the Trinity or the Bible or anything else, now it's getting flipped back on them, going, wait a minute, if you took what you just said seriously, it destroys your own religion. And dawah guys don't know what to do, because they've got the dawah script, which is meant to attack Christianity, and it's all lies about Islam. And now people can flip the script back on them and show, no, that's not what Islam says. And they don't know what to do. And what happens? You show up to Speaker's Corner and they go running.
listen, we have the LPA, guys. I would have played music, but I think it's copyright, so I can't play the music here. But listen, we have the LPA. The LPA, the logical problem of the Athari. Okay? And the logical problem of the Athari is how we interpret these things. So we have the Zahri meaning, and the Zahri meaning is to say that God's hand, let's say God has a yad, a hand, right? That's to say that God's yad has a ta'wil, so a non-literal meaning. Then the other interpretation, which is the ta'wili meaning, which is that we say that God's hand actually means God's hand, right? So Zahiri meaning is like God's hand is actually a real thing, and then God's hand is a metaphor. Those are the only two options, okay? Either it's a metaphor or it's not. The craziest thing is in this debate, guy on the left, Ijaz, who literally foams at the mouth in this debate, by the way, David. Like, he actually physically foams at, like, his bottom lip here. Like, I threw up on stream. I had to stop the stream because I couldn't physically see Ijaz. It was disgusting. The guy on the right, Ijaz, on the left, Ijaz Ahmed, okay, he believes that it's a metaphor. Haqiqatjou believes it's a real thing. So the God that they worship are two different gods because literally the attributes you apply to them are different, right?
So you've got two different so you're pointing out that these guys believe in two different gods.
Facts. Now, again, I messed up the Zahri and Ta'wili meaning. I'm just going to translate it into English. Either it's literal or it's not. Either when Allah has a hand, it's a real hand, okay? Now, it might not be like my hand with fingers. We know Allah's hand has two fingers, okay? But whether it's my hand, whether it's the hand of a clock, which, by the way, is a metaphor, Muslim, so don't use the hand of a clock. Either it's that or it's a metaphor. These two people don't agree. And we're going to see Daniel Haqiqatjou leave his creed. It's going to be hilarious. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's going to be
from his authentic narrations. Secondly, the second problem he has is that according to the Quran, the spirit of Allah is not Gabriel. So I'm going to now press him in the rebuttal period to prove otherwise. There's not a single verse in the Quran that says the spirit, the ruh, is Jibreel. He's now dependent on the very scholars of Islam that come centuries later to bail out Allah and his messenger, because that's what he accused the Lord Jesus, that Jesus wasn't clear enough to articulate the Trinity, but he did make an admission, which is now going to come and bite him. He admitted Paul taught the Trinity. It's now recorded. I want everyone to hear it. Paul taught the Trinity, because when we come to the scriptures, I'm going to show that even the Quran acknowledges that Paul was used by Allah to spread the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
little side. Guys, this is hilarious. So he's saying, hey, Daniel's saying, hey, the Trinity, that comes from Paul. Okay, well, according to the Quran and early Muslim exegetes, Paul was affirmed as an apostle. Why? Because they're reading Surah 61 verse 14, where Allah promises to protect the true followers of Jesus until they become uppermost. And so from a Muslim perspective, wait, Allah says he helped the true followers of Jesus. Guess what? Paul is one of the guys who won in early disputes, and therefore Allah is the one who made him uppermost. So Allah was supporting that work. And you do have Muslims who are interpreting a passage of the Quran as affirming the Apostle Paul. So that's one issue. And apart from that, Sam's destroying them on the consistency issue. But yeah, we got some problem.
And what happens here is they want to pin things on Paul. They want to make Paul the guy that started everything in the wrong direction. He's the creator of what Christians actually believe now. They're so used to doing that, just throwing Paul under the bus and charging Paul with certain things. Even though usually I like to challenge people and say, you show me something Paul taught that was different from what the others taught. And then the challenge there is I have to then show them where this is found elsewhere in Scripture. I'm not saying people always have to take that approach. It's just a matter of fact that Paul wasn't teaching something different than you can find in the Gospels or you can find in the other epistles and so forth. But they're so used to blaming things on Paul that they forget their own narrative, right? Their narrative says the Trinity was created in the 4th century or sometime after the Apostolic Age. But they're so used to attacking Paul that they just fall into this. I bet that Daniel wasn't even I don't think he's thinking the vast majority of time when he's trying to argue. My point is that he's just so used to making these wild statements that he doesn't realize when his own wild statements are acting like Allah's attributes and they're at war with each other, trying to triumph over each other.
Yeah. And guys,
The crazy thing.
oh yeah, I'll just be real quick. As far as what Sam was pointing out there, this is not. I wouldn't think this is a terribly well. It is an important point that the spirit in the Quran is not identified as Gabriel. That comes. You have to go outside the Quran to find that, and you have to rely on later sources and so on. So and Sam points out you have to wait on later scholars to break that down for you. So what was Sam doing there? He's pointing out, wait, you said, hey, if the Trinity is so important, why wasn't it more clearly and concisely explained in the Bible? And thus not requiring later people to actually have discussions about it. What's Sam pointing out? Wait a minute. According to the Quran, the spirit is the Quran doesn't tell you that the spirit is Gabriel. So you've got Allah breathing out His spirit. Now you've got some weird stuff, because the same reasoning that Muslim theologians applied with the speech of Allah, namely that it has to be eternal, would apply to the spirit of Allah. If Allah is breathing something out, He has to be breathing it out from all eternity, or He changed at some point, and therefore the spirit would have to be eternal. So is Allah eternally breathing out the angel Gabriel, according to what you guys believe? Later guys had to figure that out and how to reconcile that with Tawhid and so on. And so what's that mean? It means that Daniel's own standard is, oh, if later guys have to come along and discuss this stuff, then that shows you guys are just making this up as you go along. And it's exactly what happens in Islam. So again, no concept of consistency. Go ahead and say whatever you were saying, SIIIG, and then we'll jump back into this response.
Yeah, I mean, and the whole entire time, the method of polemic has not changed at all. You can even see in this, I'm sharing my screen just quickly because I think, David, you would love to see this. Okay, I think you're going to find this kind of hilarious. This, I believe, sums up.
You want this up on the screen?
Yes, please.
Okay,
this sums up the apologetic.
One second.
All good?
All right, there you go.
This, as you can see on the screen, guys, sums up the entire apologetic and polemical method that Muslims used. I made this as a throwaway joke some time ago, but I believe that it's very accurate. As you can see already, Daniel Haqiqatjou cannot make any arguments outside of Bible contradict, God die, only through God, Jesus poo, these things here.
You put the Dawa script onto a bingo board.
Yeah, I did. And this is the one that he's using. 3 gods and Tawhid simple. I actually made this months ago. I made this literally months ago before this debate, and Daniel Haqiqatjou just repeats it again. So I think, guys, if you screenshot that, take that, use that as funnily as you want, meme that out, that would be great. Thank you so much. But yeah, I think that should be it. Let's get back to the video.
All right, let's see here. Oops, there we go. And all right, let's go back into Sam's response.
The spirit, according to the Quran, is distinct from Allah. He appears as a man. He speaks and creates. So now if we add the spirit to the Quran and Allah, He's got about 116 divine persons or beings, and He doesn't have a singular person called Allah.
Who are you talking to, Anthony? What?
Oh, he was unmuted the whole time.
I muted myself. I was going to say, by the way, that shows when he says 115 earlier, he means Allah and the 114 chapters. Because here you just said if you have the spirit to Allah and the Quran, you now have 116.
Oh, okay. So I was interpreting 115 as the Quran as a unit, and then the 114. So
well,
you'd have to say
117.
That's 117.
Yeah. So you've got Allah, you've got the Quran as Voltron, then you've got the 114 more, the Quran as individual chapters, and then the spirit of Allah. So we're up to 117. Because keep in mind, guys, all of these are different things, or you say they're all one, and that it's Allah speaking to Himself through a variety of personalities. Let's see
we can go a little further.
Allah be like a Megazord then?
What's that?
Wouldn't Allah be like a Megazord, like in Power Rangers?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Power Rangers, but yeah, I'm guessing it's similar to Voltron, right? Something like
basically
that.
Voltron.
A bunch of pieces coming together.
Voltron.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or Devastator. For Muslims, you might want to, because since Voltron's are here, you might want to say Devastator, something like that. The Constructicons coming together to form Devastator, something like that.
That's pretty good. That is pretty good.
Just the issue of the fact that according to our friend here, this is his belief. Allah has, well, he wouldn't use the term body parts. I don't want to misrepresent him. Allah has a foot. He has a shin. He even has loins, and he has at least 2 eyes, if not more, and 2 right hands. Now, for the life of me, if Allah is the creator of the heavens and the earth, how does he exist as an embodied being without him dwelling in space? Because if he's atemporal and he's timeless, that means his God supposedly exists when there was no time, space, and place. But if you have a foot and you have a shin and you have 2 right hands, I don't know what happened to the left one, but we'll get into that. 2 right hands, at least 2 eyes. In fact, the Arabic says 3 or more, but we'll get into that. Then that means his God is an embodied being who is temporal and finite, which means that his God did not create all space or place and time, because there's a space that his body parts need to occupy in order for him to be his God. So the problem is actually worse for Daniel.
Oh, so now, in other words, if Allah, and guys, keep in mind, we do want to be clear here. Not all Muslims agree with Daniel, with Daniel on this. So you do have, the question is how they would interpret various passages of the Quran, which led the Salafi/Atharis to conclude that Allah has actual body parts. But what Sam has pointed out so far is you've got Allah, you've got 114 chapters of the Quran, which all intercede and speak as personal agents. You've got the spirit of Allah. And then if Allah has a body, then there must be space. And if Allah is eternally the same, then there's always been this space. So now you have this other thing that is eternal, that is not Allah. The space is not Allah, and yet it's co-eternal with Allah if he has always existed as an embodied being. So Sam just saying, hey, here's what you guys just said to blast the Trinity, and what happens if we actually apply your method consistently? You got some problems here.
And for us, so he's going to have to explain how is it that he's a polytheist, pagan, masquerading as a monotheist, because what he just told you is not anchored in the Quran or the authentic Sunnah of Muhammad. So good luck in trying to defend your irrational Salafi anthropomorphism. And last time I checked, his partner doesn't share his Salafi anthropomorphism. So we're going to have a field day. Now, how much time do I have?
1 minute to go.
Can we stop here? That's the thing that I was saying before. That's the
Yeah.
exact thing that I was saying before, right? Now, this is where chat, I need you guys to lock in, okay? Because David Wood is giving you guys some wisdom right now. David Wood is giving you some of that wahi, that revelation right now. So lock in, okay?
I got the hikmah.
So the hikmah, the Haqiqatjou, that hikmah, that's right there. So we need to lock in so that you can understand what's about to happen. So guys, on the right, you have Daniel Haqiqatjou, who takes the Zahir meaning, okay? Now, the Zahir meaning isn't just some literal meaning. It is literally the first idea that comes to your head when you hear the word. That's very important. According to Ibn Qudama, okay, Ibn Qudama says that the Zahir of a wording is what comes to mind from that text, irrespective of whether it is literal, haqiqah, or figurative. So the Zahir meaning, the apparent meaning, is whatever first comes to the mind. So when you hear hand, the first thing that comes to mind, chat, is this. Okay, that's the first thing that comes to mind. When I hear face, the first thing that comes to mind is this. When you think of hijab, yeah, it means that. That's the Zahir meaning. That's Daniel Haqiqatjou. When he hears that Allah puts his foot in hell, okay, according to Ahmed ibn Hanbal, which, by the way, if Daniel Haqiqatjou rejects that, then he's saying that Ahmed ibn Hanbal is wrong. If that is the way that it's interpreted, that is Daniel Haqiqatjou, okay? So that is the literal Zahir meaning. The Ta'wil meaning is to divert away from the Zahir meaning. It's to divert away from the literal apparent interpretation. So what Ijaz will do, which is different, right? So two gods, different, is that they're going to divert away from when Allah has ears, when Allah has eyes, when Allah has a veil, when Allah has hands and a shin. All of these are ta'wil. They divert away from the apparent meaning. So Ijaz interprets his God differently than Daniel Haqiqatjou.
Two different gods. And it's just weird, because we thought, based on what Daniel was saying, you would have thought that Muslims are totally on the same page and they all understand the Tawhid in the same way, because it's so clear in the Quran. Unlike Christians who had to have discussions and theological disputes later on, Islam has always been on the same page. And it's just been pointed out, even the two Muslim debaters aren't on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so real quickly, so one, it shouldn't be forgotten, even on Ijaz's view, Allah still has the problem of multiplicity. He just doesn't think included in that multiplicity are anthropomorphic qualities, but other things, other eternal things. They're just not tangible things or something comparable to human attributes like eyes, hands, face. But
like knowledge.
Yeah,
like the
knowledge, hearing, seeing, that sort of thing. So SIIG mentioned Ibn Khuzaimah. Most people haven't heard of him, but he was actually a very famous hadith scholar. He was ranked up there with the likes of Sahih Bukhari or Muslim, the other guys. And his hadith collection is invaluable to the actual hadith scholars. You know, they're not published as the other ones are, but they're still considered a source of legitimate hadiths that aren't found in the standard collections. But I find him especially interesting because, well, here's an example of his reasoning. So in Surah 7, 194 of the Quran, it's ridiculing the gods of the pagans, and it says, have they feet to walk with? The idea is they have feet, but they can't walk because they don't have feet. Or do they have hands to lay hold with, or eyes to see with, or ears to hear with? The reason this is so interesting is because it sounds like a verse of the Bible, but it turns it on its head. The Bible's ridiculing the false gods because it says they have hands, right? They have feet, they have eyes, but they can't see, hear, or do anything, right? But the Quran is ridiculing these pagan gods, the things that they believe in, because they don't have the requisite equipment to carry out these actions. They don't have eyes to see with. They don't. So it presupposes the necessity of these things in order to carry out these actions. So Ibn Khuzaimah, commenting on this, he's talking about this exact verse. He says, he quotes the verse, and then he says, if he does not have eyes, nor ears, nor hand, nor foot, then what we are worshiping is a watermelon. So he thinks of his God as kind of like a Mr. Potato Head, where you put these little, it's just like Voltron, like you're talking about. You can attach these little parts to him. So, I mean, and there's a logic there, right? I mean, somebody might want to say that can be undermined, that's not a good interpretation, but there's nothing there. And this guy was no dummy. He's even called the Imam of Imams by Muslims. He was a hadith scholar, highly regarded by many people. And so, you have to say there's something here that at least Daniel has to take a step back and deal with before pretending, well, if Christians disagree on something, then that just shows that their entire theology is false.
Yeah, guys, and just to be clear to everyone, so we're pointing out that Daniel and Ijaz actually disagree on their theology. So as far as Sam's criticisms, when Sam is pointing out that you have a law, but then you also have this eternal Quran, both those guys are going to agree with that. So that applies to both of them. When you have in Sunni Muslim sources that the individual chapters of the Quran appear and intercede and so on, that is true for both of these guys. They're both Sunni Muslims. The difference is with Allah actually having body parts, and if he actually has a body, then that body must exist in space, and space would be some additional thing that is eternal. That's something that so far would apply to Daniel, but he would have to agree with Ijaz. So in other words, a bunch of what Sam said would apply to both of these guys, but not necessarily to all of it to other Muslims who might reject some of those sources. But some of it is going to depend on what they think about Allah's body parts. But Sam has, I think, there's another minute left for the Christian side, so we'll see what they say.
Last minute, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that in Daniel's opening statement, he also committed a fallacy, which is a form of Occam's razor fallacy. He kept appealing to the fact that because it's simple, that it must be obvious, it must be the case. Just because something seems or appears to be simpler or more obvious, or because it was only 4 short and simple sentences, has nothing to do with whether it's true or false. In fact, as we're going to see, the Muslims amongst themselves and their various schools all compete and disagree and fight, not only over the attributes, but also over jurisprudence.
Okay.
Yeah, little. I mean, what Jay was pointing out there, just because you think something is simpler and easier to understand doesn't make it true. In other words, so Newtonian mechanics. So the mechanics of how the world operates according to Isaac Newton. Newtonian mechanics is way simpler. It's way easier to understand than quantum mechanics. That doesn't mean that quantum mechanics isn't true. That doesn't mean that. In other words, you can't just say, well, that one's simpler, therefore it's true. No, you'd have to actually go out and find out whether it's true or not. And sometimes it's something that is more confusing to you is actually the truth. And so, I mean, yeah, getting it. I was just talking yesterday about how I've wanted to make a skit for years where you have a group of Dawa guys and they're sitting in a physics class as their professor explains quantum mechanics or Einstein's general theory of relativity, and they're just going, "Oh, what is this, brother? What is this? This is so complicated. This can't be true." And it's like, you guys couldn't be cosmologists in this with the way you're thinking. You couldn't do that. You couldn't get to the truth about reality using the methodology, but you think you're getting to the truth about God by applying this stuff? Anyway, weird stuff. All right, so I guess they're cutting it off there. Let me see.
Great. So just a little bit of time, but so that concludes opening statements. Obviously, that segues perfectly into our first thing. What I'll do is, do we have any chats to read, or we'll just go right into the first one, guys. Get your chats in now, and I'll read them after the first round. After opening statement. So segues perfectly into round one, which is theology, Trinity versus the Tawhid. I'm going to turn it back to team Islam. You guys I'm going to put 4 minutes on the clock for you guys. And we will, are you guys ready? All right. Bills, do you have the clock or you want me to do it here? Yeah, 4 minutes for this one.
It's funny. He's asking why they don't have the chats ready. Here you go. No logical contradictions in Trinity. I recommend reading Discourses Against Arian's book by early church father Saint Athanasius of Alexandria. We have Before Abraham was, I am. Jesus is God. God bless you all, Christians. Triune God is, was, and forever will be. We've got Jesus saying, the one who has seen me has seen the Father.
Amen.
We've got Matt Silva saying, Dawa meeting room, Mimi hijab, Haqiqatjou, Ali Dawa, very proud of that. And Satan, I mean Gabriel/Alan. Powerful. Ali Baba says, we would appreciate if Anthony could actually review, please. SIIIG, you good, bro. But Anthony does a good job for Islamic points. What in the world are you talking about? Anthony has been talking this entire time. So has SIIIG. Stop trying to cause division here. We see a couple of people who say, hey,
Huh? I appreciate SIIIG's comments.
Yes,
it's okay, bro.
We do too. We've heard from Anthony a million times. It's good hearing from the British guys. My favorite Muslim argument against the Trinity is that Jesus ate food. Apparently, the all-powerful creator of the universe is not capable of having a snack. Yeah, even though he has a body, according to Daniel Haqiqatjou, it's still yes. And then Mo here, good old Mo, about Trinity. Easy to see Father and Son in picture based on Christ's words. Hard to find third one of Trinity in same picture. Dishonest ones say we question Jesus' divinity. Not true. This is Mo, the guy who was saying I only ever talk about Islam. And Joshua here says, did AP join the... Sons of Anarchy?
Sons of Anarchy.
Sons of
Anarchy. Give his life to Jesus.
Harley Davidson, be upon him. Joking. Just kidding. All you are great and debate AP on something interesting to him. Canned Ace. Yeah, I'm sure we're going to be going into the Candace issue. And what denomination is SIIIG? He seems to have a high view of the church and church fathers. Very fond of his input. Very insightful. In your face person who said, no, SIIG just needs to shut up. We can't understand him with his British accent.
It's okay, man. Listen, I have no hatred for anyone. I love it, okay? I love the controversy. I love people trying to help me improve. So it's all good on my end. I don't really mind. It's all right, man.
Yeah. And what the heck? SIIG sounding like hijab? Madness? Yeah, SIIG does a pretty decent... Oh,
David, you'll love this. I had dinner with the guy.
Hijab?
Yeah. I had dinner with Mo. Yeah. It was a crazy... So... this is like my second time going to the corner. I go to the corner and I meet Mohammed Hijab and I basically cook him on this argument about how his God means a necessary creation because of the way he thinks about his attributes. So I sort of cooked him there. He then invites me to go out to dinner. Now, me having like a hurt leg, I'm like, okay, I hobble over and I go to dinner with the guy and I take off my mask, right? So Muhammad Hijab, if you ever dox me, I'll know it's you because you know what I look like. Now, this person, I talked to him and it was weird. Like Muhammad Hijab around outside of the camera is such a weird entity. Like he was like very humble. Like I don't know how to explain. Like it's almost like he's doing it as a bit for the cameras, as in when the camera comes on, he has to be like macho, masculine man. But like outside of that, he's just like a normal Londoner, like speaking basic slang, like
So
not
it's a
trying to
show.
sound
It's a
verbose
show.
with his words. But it's like, even like terms I was explaining, like I was giving him philosophical terms and definitions, and like he was like writing them down on a piece of paper and trying to like understand them. It was so weird. Like I don't think he's authentic at all. Like
You
if he
think?
is authentic, hey,
He's
I
not.
don't think he's authentic, bro. I'm
He's
not gonna
not.
lie
Everything
to you.
is a show. Everything is a show. But that's dawah, and that's dawah in general. And you're ending up with people who meet the dawah requirements, right? The dawah is just all show. It's all smoke and mirrors and pretending and pretending to be being overconfident and stuff where your actual material does not justify that level of confidence. It's all show, and so you end up with people who are basically actors, and that's what you're getting there.
But it's also like he does like there are moments where like you do see the real Muhammad Hijab, like especially when he laughs, like he genuinely thinks he's funny. Like there's times where like the crash out of Muhammad Hijab has to be studied. Like there are times where Muhammad Hijab like lashes out like without control. Like maybe the recent Alex Jones thing is a good example where
That's funny.
like that's him. Like that's actually
No,
Muhammad
watch it.
Hijab. Like
Yeah.
Londoner crash out. That is Muhammad Hijab. Like he's not like the suave like understand Islam, brother. I'm gonna use authority to teach you the way of Islam, brother. Like that's not him. Like he wants to be that guy, but he's just not that guy. He's too arrogant to do it. Like he's like me. We're just too arrogant to be that. So he crashes out. It's crazy.
Yeah, we're gonna be. It is fun to watch. I have to say, it is fun to watch. A couple more, and then we'll jump back into this video. Wait, Allah has two fingers, as in like a lobster claw? I had no idea. He was a Lovecraftian old one. He's even more sinister than I thought. Yeah, we have people who've drawn pictures of Allah. It would be, I wanted to get a drawing of Allah that actually incorporates all the Muslim sources on the issue, and then kind of have it a really well done graphic that we can kind of zoom in on for discussions of, and then show the Muslim sources when they talk about that body part and why it's drawn a certain way and so on. One hadith says Allah is a curly-haired boy with cold hands, and he put his cold hands on Muhammad's shirtless back. Sounds a bit gay. Yeah, Anthony, what's that about?
Well, so it sounds like splicing a couple different hadiths here, but there are hadiths that talk about Allah and describe him as a young beardless youth, which is interesting. Why is he portrayed that way? In the history of Islam in certain areas, if you look at Joseph von S's book on Islam, he's got a number of books, but he'll talk about how this actually led to some really perverted practices, because the Quran tells Muslims to meditate on or remember Allah, the remembrance of Allah. And so to facilitate this, Muslims used to look at young beardless youths to help them remember Allah. And this led to from one thing to another and so forth. And so anyways, there's that. There are hadiths that talk about Allah this way. They describe his sandals and his robe and the color of it and all the rest. But then there's a Tirmidhi hadith that mentions Allah putting his hand between Muhammad's two shoulder blades and feeling its coolness in his chest. And this is actually really significant, because when Muslims start saying things like, we don't say how, what they want you to think is, well, you know, it's a hand, but you can't start describing it as having limits. And, you know, they want to try and somehow get out of the problem that creates, the one that Sam's talking about, right? That Allah needs space. He needs a context in which these things can exist. But when you've got Allah putting his hand between Muhammad's two shoulder blades, well, that starts limiting it, doesn't it? It's now starting to sound a whole lot more like the kind of hand that immediately comes to your mind, right? Like Sid was saying. And then you're feeling its coolness, or Muhammad in this case, its coolness in his chest. So it has sensation. It's palpable. So this sounds a whole lot like hand to me.
Bear in mind as well with this attribute stuff, is they say that we affirm what Allah affirms, and we deny what Allah denies. But then there's this middle position. What about stuff that Allah doesn't talk about? The Quran and the Sunnah do not talk about whether Allah has a heart or not. For example, the Quran does not say whether Allah has a heart, does not say Allah does not have a heart. Now, I may be wrong, and people can correct me, that's fine, right? But as an example, it doesn't say that Allah doesn't have toenails, right? It doesn't say that Allah does not have toenails. Now, we can't say that he doesn't have toenails, but we can't say that he does have toenails, according to Daniel's belief. So that would mean that you fail the law of excluded middle, because you can't affirm or negate this for Allah, right? Either this is the case or this is not the case. But you're saying it's neither one or the other. That's a denial of the third law of logic.
Let's see. We'll go through a couple more here. Wait, which ayah is that? The parts necessity one. So this is from earlier from Celeria. Which ayah is that? The parts necessity one.
Oh, I think they're probably asking about Surah 7. So in Surah 7, 194 through 198, that's where it mentions needing feet to walk with and so forth. And what you do is you compare it to Psalm 115 and just note how it's sort of turned the logic of Psalm 115 on its head, so that it ends up reflecting the paganism of Muhammad rather than. Now, I'm not saying Muhammad self-consciously did this. He probably didn't have a clue. He's just thinking like a pagan, and he expresses it in terms of his natural mode of thought.
Right.
Yeah, some pagan nonsense. David Wood, is it true that Asadullah al-Andalusi challenged you to a debate and you accepted, then went silent and ran away just asking, are you joking? Yeah, so this is like, I mean, my goodness, what was this, 10 years ago? I'd never heard of the guy. He challenges me to a debate on Twitter. I accept, had no idea. And then he instantly starts sending me all these insults. Ha ha, blah, blah, I'm going to humiliate you, blah, 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 blah. And I responded like, all right, dude, I'm not interested. You at least have to get along with someone well enough to set up a debate. If they're bombarding you with insults, keep in mind, I have no problem with insults, mockery, and stuff like that. And sometimes you would have to put up with it if you're talking about. So in other words, if you were going to debate Ali Dawa, you'd say it's worth it, even if he's going to toss in insults, because he has a big following and so on. If it's some random guy you've never heard, guys, this happens like 20 times a year, where some guy says, hey, let's debate me. And you're going, okay. And then he's like heaps insults and you're like, wait, I have no idea who you are. I'm not interested. So yeah, that has happened. Guys, if someone has a bunch of followers and you want to debate that person, for the audience, you kind of have to put up with certain things. If you have no clue who someone is, you don't want to get involved. And so, yeah, Asadullah is one of those guys in that category. Hats off to him. Yes, if I don't know who you are and you toss out enough insults, I'm not going to be interested in having in setting up a debate with you, because it's just like, wait a minute, it could take time to come up with the venue and to agree upon rules and stuff. And if it's already an insult fest at the very beginning, do I really want to do that? Do I really want to do that or do something else? But yeah, in their mind, keep in mind, they'll be talking about it for the next 10 years. Oh, he ran, so scared. Yeah, I'm terrified of you, dude. I still have I at least know who he is now. That's one of the guys, matter of fact, Asadullah Ali, he's the guy we use that clip as far as the avalanche of apostasy. He's the one who's talking to a room full of Muslims, talking about, telling them, guys, and I go around and I have met hundreds of people who are actually ex-Muslims, but they're like, they're going to the madrasa, they're leading prayers and so on, and they're coming to me and confiding in me that I don't actually believe in this stuff. So that's the guy. He's seeing the avalanche of apostasy in real time and reporting on it. That you have all these Muslims who are in mosques, who are even leading prayers. He's saying that some of them have the Quran memorized and they don't believe it and so on. So these are actually awesome times. But Asadullah Ali, if you're going to toss out insults, then you need to be more popular so you can get away with it. Other than that, no one's going to want to interact with you.
Would you ever debate Muhammad Ijaz again?
Who,
Would you
me?
ever do that again?
Oh, in a heartbeat.
You'd spin back on it?
I was just saying he's not going to do it again. Matter of fact, SIIIG, I was just talking about this with AP. The Dawa guys seem to have short career spans, because they come out and what'll happen is each new guy comes along with his new kind of shtick, right? Like hijab comes along, and when you have no idea who they are, then you can actually come along and you've got your, if you're going to go into a debate and you've got your new thing, oh, I'm going to insult the guy, ha 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 ha. It's like, okay, now we know, because I didn't know who you were beforehand. But the same thing with like Daniel Haqiqatjou. His thing is he comes in and he starts citing all these sources. Oh, and this article shows this, and this study has shown this. And other people, the people he's debating it, they haven't read those. So you assume that he's telling the truth. And then later on, you get someone like Inspiring Philosophy who comes on, reads all those sources, and then comes up and says, "This guy's totally lying. This guy's totally." No, with Daniel, when he was citing all these, he would be citing all these sources in debates, and you think, "Oh, he's giving accurate information," and so on.
You know about the child marriage stuff as well.
Oh yeah. Eventually, he was citing sources where I knew what he was talking about, and I knew he was lying. And then I was like, "Whoa, wait! You're citing these 20 different studies." But now you're saying that the Catholic Encyclopedia says, I know what the Catholic Encyclopedia says, and it says the opposite of what you're saying. And so, and then you have Inspiring Philosophy who actually reads all those studies, and then he points out Daniel's misrepresenting everything. He's misrepresenting everything. And so the point is, look at Daniel's start. He was very successful with this, and this study has shown this, and this study has shown this, and this study shows that wife beating is great. Whatever he's quoting this stuff for, right?
That's a crazy take, by the way. That's that's an
insane take. He's basically using all these sources to defend child marriage and so on. But guess what? No one is dedicating their lives to studying all this stuff with child marriage, right? So it works for a while. Until you got people who actually go through the sources and then say, wait a minute, this is not what these sources say. And guess what? The methodology collapses. Look at Daniel's recent debates. He's been getting crushed. What happens? You come out with your new shtick. It works for a while. People catch on. Then you need to stop debating because your method's not going to work anymore. They're on to you. But that's the same. That's the same with Daniel Hijab. It's the same with all these guys, and that's why you have people like Zakir Naik, who comes along. He does what, 2 or 3 debates early on before anyone knew what his methodology was. And then what happens? Never debates again. That's what you have to do. Go use it, get your little bit of success. Then once everyone catches on to you, stop debating. Just don't do it again because you're going to get embarrassed. Right. That's what these guys need to do. And I think Hijab is onto that. That's why you don't see, I mean, if Hijab is really the champion of debate, he should be going around like debating everyone. Instead, everyone's challenging him.
He went to Speaker's Corner. He went to Speaker's Corner. Over 300 debates. No one defeated me. Of course.
He actually said that on the Fresh and Fit podcast as well. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, weird, wild stuff. How was Muhammad the last prophet if Jesus is still alive? That is a good question, and it's related to the issue of Ahmadis and believing in that Mirza Ghulam Ahmed is the second coming of Jesus, and Muslims say, you're not real Muslims because you believe in a prophet after Muhammad. Well, guess what? The rest of you Sunni Muslims believe in a prophet after Muhammad. You believe in the second coming of Jesus, which is what Ahmadis believe. So you can rule them out as Muslims, but not on that basis. Who assembled Mr. Potato Head, Allah and his parts? Yeah, that's a good question. If Allah is the Mr. Potato Head, then who assembled him? And is Allah a Shadakan? Ooh, brother. I don't know what that means.
Wait, I have the sound. That's why he's like a...
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
Brother,
Brother, ooh.
What's that?
That is awesome stuff. All right, guys, now we hear the response from the Muslims. We're going to see how powerful this is.
And from this point forward, it's going to be 4 minutes. So just opening statements, only 5.
5 minutes.
So once you guys start talking, we'll hit the clock. We'll do that, Bills, to make it easier. Once they start talking, we'll hit the clock.
Okay, I guess I'll go first here.
Oh, awesome. Now we get to hear from Ijaz. This is going to be awesome. So guys, they disagree on their theology, and we'll find out if this comes out.
Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala. Notice that for this debate, Sam Shamoun had to create a religion, a mockery, something which does not actually exist, in order to argue against the Muslims. No Muslim believes that Allah is 115 persons. Not even the Christians who didn't understand Islam, like John of Damascus, could come up with something so ridiculous.
Wait, they say John of Damascus doesn't understand Islam?
No. He's saying that Sam's argument is so ridiculous. He's made up something that is so outlandish. Not even John of Damascus. So he's putting down John of Damascus, but he's trying to put down Sam more, right? So Sam's outlandish, even John of Damascus. Now, here's the irony, though. if I were to read Muslim sources, right, he's saying Christians weren't saying this sort of thing. Now, that's just not true. But I could turn to Muslim sources in the early history of Islam who were making these sorts of criticisms. So the idea that Sam is doing something here that is so outlandish, not even other critics of Islam would do this. Ijaz doesn't realize, no, this is right in his own backyard, right? His own backyard is full of people that accused the Asharis, the Maturidis, those who affirmed attributes for Allah. They accused them of being polytheists, of asserting a multiplicity of entities in addition to Allah, his existence, his essence, and so forth. So,
and in addition to that, Sam is just saying, here's what you guys said. Here's what you guys said would mean that the triune God is actually separate God. You guys said this, and go ahead. Let me go ahead and explain. If that's what you're saying, these have to be separate beings because of this. Then okay. According to your definition, I go to your sources, individual chapters of the Quran, which contain different knowledge. That was one of your criteria. If two things have different knowledge, they can't be the same being. Okay, well, yeah. So different chapters of the Quran contain different knowledge, and they appear as personal agents. So they're communicating. But wait a minute, these things are the speech of Allah. So either you have the speech. So either Allah is talking to himself and having this discussion with himself, or they're separate beings. You guys decide. So he's saying that, and they're going, oh, but we don't believe that. Right. It's an implication of what your sources say and the method that you just used, right? In other words, I say, if I take what you just said about my theology to refute it, and I say, okay, that's your methodology. Now I know your methodology. If I take your methodology and I apply the exact same thing to your own sources, here's what you get. Here are the implications of that. Prove me wrong. Prove that those are not the implications. And Ijaz's response, but we don't believe that. Right. What you mean is you haven't applied your methodology to your own sources. Great. Sam did it for you. Sam did it for you. So if that's what happens let me put it this way. If what happens when you take your sources and you apply your methodology to your sources, if what happens is something you do not believe, that either means you have a problem with your sources, you have a problem with your methodology. I don't think you're going to dispute your sources, which means your methodology is defective. It leads to things that you do not believe. Why are you applying a methodology to Christians when you do not believe your methodology? That's the point. That's the overall takeaway. And what's the Muslim side going to do? They're going to insist on applying the same methodology that they would never apply to their own sources. And
they're going to insist on lying.
Yeah. So here we go. Ijaz.
That this is the case in Christian theology, that God is another being. I mean, I do believe that I do think that they believe in, what's his name? Justin Martyr, saying that there's another entity. Of course, they would like to revise that, but that's what he literally says. When it comes to the New Testament, Jesus says it's a person cannot have two masters, or rather that he cannot serve two lords. We look at the Jesus of the New Testament, he's at odds with the Christian understanding of the doctrine of the Trinity. We can even go a step further than this. For us Muslims, yes, the Quran describes Allah in a simple way in Surah Al-Ikhlas, but from this we get a comprehensive understanding. We say that this is a Jawami al-Kalam, or speech which is extensive. You can ask us almost any question about the nature of Allah, and in those short passages.
And just a little bit on what he just said, but you can ask us anything, and we'll be able to. What do you mean? You mean later guys actually tried to clarify this, fought wars over it, and so on, and the guys, and now you guys go with certain people and so on. That's exactly what you condemned Christians for doing. You said, hey, if later Christians have discussions about this and they clarify and so on, this shows that the Christian view is false and is not actually in the Bible and so on. And then and then he's sitting there saying, oh, we've got all this figured out. Based on what? Based on, if I ask you, hey, is the Quran eternal and so on, is the Quran eternal? You guys had to have debates and even fight over this stuff later on. What's that mean? Ijaz, it's actually very simple. Daniel applied a criticism to Christianity, which if we take the exact same criticism, flip it on you. Wait a minute, you guys had all sorts of debates and fights over Tawhid and so on. Therefore, the Quran isn't clear on this fundamental doctrine. It's not clear on this fundamental doctrine. And you, what do? No, we're clear on this. We're clear on that. You guys, the Muslim side does not even agree on this. You guys don't even agree on your theology, which means, according to what you just said, that the Quran is not clear, and it's not clear on this fundamental doctrine, and therefore you guys have this massive theological problem. That is exactly what the criticism you raised against the Trinity, and all they did was all they're doing is flipping it back on you, and you guys don't know what to do, and you get mad about it. This is pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. That was a joke.
I heard this stuff yesterday, and it still shocks me, which is insane. Like, I heard all of these things yesterday, and it still shocks me, because he said, well, we can tell you anything about what this means. Okay, what does the word one mean? Spoiler alert, don't use any created entity or thought whatsoever. Now, what does one mean? Right? Like, that's the problem.
We can understand it to the point that if I were to compare this with the Bible, I would not be able to find 4 verses that simply and reasonably explain the nature of God. If God loved us, He cared for us, and He was merciful for us, then there's a duty there, a justice, where He would want us to understand Him. But our Christian
guys, I don't want to. I want to let him talk because this is like embarrassingly terrible. But now it's we have our theology in 4 verses. If God were merciful and just in the Bible, then He would put these doctrines in 4 verses, and he's completely missing the point. You've got your 4 verses in the Quran, and there are all these additional elements in Tawhid that are not included in those 4 verses. You'd have to unpack them in various ways and have debates and arguments and so on about them. So one, you have a completely stupid methodology. If this is true, then it would be in 4 verses and nothing more. Where? Show me that. Show me.
And why
show
4?
me.
Why not 3? Why not 2?
If quantum mechanics is true, you'd have to explain it all in four sentences. Why? Where are you getting that? That is a made up, stupid, insane rule. So one, it's a made up, stupid, ridiculous rule that you guys just made up. And 2, if you took your own rule seriously, you'd fall apart, because there are all sorts of things in Tawhid that are not in those 4 verses. So take your pick. Stupid rule that you made up. Why are you applying it as if Christians have to follow this same rule? 2, if you actually believe the rule, your own theology falls apart. The criticism falls back on you. And since we don't actually believe in the rule, but you do, your theology just falls apart and ours doesn't. Gosh, this is bad. Let's let this guy continue.
If you really love your wife, then you'll express that to her on one occasion with just 4 sentences, and you'll never say anything else ever again to fill that out, to reinforce that, to reaffirm it, whatever.
You have a duty, David.
Yeah.
David, guys, you have a duty to make sure that you actually explain this in 4 sentences. You have a duty, David.
Yeah, guys, everyone who's watching, keep in mind, these are not random people. I mean, it would be easy to find Christians who aren't very knowledgeable and would say some dumb things. You can find Muslims who aren't knowledgeable and they say dumb things. These are like prominent dawah guys, and this is the level of their thinking. It's always, we're making up a stupid rule that we have no basis for, and then we'll apply the stupid rule that we made up to Christianity to attack Christianity, even though the exact same rule that we made up, if we applied it to ourselves, would completely destroy our theology. And then they just roll with it. And that's dawah. That's all dawah does. And that's why dawah is collapsing, ladies and gentlemen. That's why it's collapsing. Let's get back to Ijaz.
Fundamentally cannot and do not understand God. I'll give one simple example here. The God of the Quran was able to describe himself as one, absolutely one, needing nothing. The God of the Bible allegedly describes himself as begotten, a word of which the meaning we cannot know and which we know was actually changed. For those who don't know, the God of the Bible, when he says that he is begotten, this comes from the Greek word monogenes. Unfortunately, that word today is not translated as unique. So if you're a Christian, does it matter to you that the Bible does not teach what you actually believe? My friend here, Sam, actually teaches that if a thing, an idea or belief, cannot stand being tested by the Bible, then it is false. So I would like to ask him, where is the belief that Jesus is begotten using the Greek of the New Testament? Brother Daniel.
Yeah, I just want to...
real quickly, so I'm sure Sam can answer this, but and will, but Ijaz says the Surah 112 is clear. It defines Allah as absolutely one, but it doesn't do that, first of all. It says one of there, technically.
One of what? One of what?
Yeah. And then there's other things that are problematic there. But then he says that the Christian has a God who's begotten. He's referring to the Son as the only begotten. And he's alleging that the word doesn't even mean that because some contemporary individuals have said it's differently derived. Etymologically, it doesn't come from...
And no one says that.
There have been those that in modern times have claimed that it has a different etymological derivation, but that's just bunk. It's been refuted. It's certainly contrary to 1900 years worth of church history. But monogenes means only begotten. But what I think what would be more fruitful here for him to push, not that it would be successful, I'm just saying, better than trying to pretend that the word really means something that modern scholars discovered that nobody else knew for 1900 years, not even the people that were commenting on it for whom this was their original language, right? Like Athanasius, Cyril, others. But better would be to say, we don't understand what this means when you say Jesus is only begotten, because it is true that the term, you can't just make it univocal. It doesn't mean exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's an analogical term. And
right.
Also,
it doesn't mean exactly that. I don't mean to speak while you're interrupting, SIIIG. No, I'm kidding.
No, it's okay. It's okay. No. My bad. I'm sorry. My bad.
No, but it's not exactly the same as what's true of human beings, but then that's what we would expect, right? It's not equivocal either. We're not simply using a term that has no points of contact with how these terms are used in our experience. One thing I would say here, just to be very simple, because Daniel and Ijaz can't follow it if I'm not, but we can be more sophisticated if we want to be. But just to be simple, is when we say Christ is the Son, obviously, since we're talking about God, this can't involve temporality or division. Right. God is indivisible and non-temporal. So while this is true of human fatherhood and sonship, it can't be true of divine sonship. So what is true of human sonship that can be analogically true then of God? Well, a son is what his father is by nature, but a distinct person. So a son is what his father is essentially, but not personally. And that's all Christians mean when they refer to the Son as the Son. And so you could do the same thing with the term begotten. What does that mean? You can show how it's analogically true and not equivocal or univocal. So Ijaz is wrong. His Surah 112 is not what he thinks it is, and Christians don't have the problem he thinks we do.
Yeah, guys, for everyone who's watching, because some of this terminology can be new, but when Muslims are approaching the Bible and you use a term like Son of God or something like this, they act as if there are only two possibilities. It's either univocal or equivocal, right? So either you mean the exact same thing as you would ordinarily mean when you say Bob is the son of Jim or something like that. You mean the exact same thing, in which case you'd be talking about a biological relationship between father and son, or you mean something completely different and there's no connection. It's got to be one or the other. That's false. There is the analogical. So you've got the univocal meaning, exact same. They mean the exact same thing. You've got the equivocal. They mean two totally different things. Or you've got the analogical. There's a kind of resemblance between the two situations, right? And so the amazing part is that this is how they will approach the Bible to blast away at it. When if someone like Daniel is actually thinking about this, you'd have to say, what does he mean by Allah's hand? Well, you don't mean it univocally. You don't mean it's the exact same thing as a human hand. And you don't mean it equivocally, like it's something completely different. It's analogical. It's analogical. I mean, something we don't understand exactly what it means. Allah does have an actual hand. He has two hands. He has actual hands. That's true. What do we mean by that? Well, we don't mean exactly the same thing, but we don't mean something that's totally different. It's somehow analogical. And so it's just a case, again, of them applying arguments and reasoning to Christianity that, if they flipped it back on themselves, would completely destroy their claims.
I would like to say something here as well when it comes to the analogical stuff, right? So in Islam, the idea of Allah's hand, it's completely dissimilar. Like anything you think of, it's not similar at all, right? Now, some will say, well, it does similar functions like a hand, like a hand can touch things and a hand can manipulate matter. Sure, but my foot could also do that. I could kick a ball. I'm manipulating matter. So the idea of Allah's hand is actually equivocal. It's completely equivocal. Whereas for Christians, yeah, God is similar to us, but not exactly the same. You know, like we predicate things analogously, and that's the problem with Islam. And it's sort of, at least in this debate, it really breaks down those realities. As for monogenes, we've always known that it's supposed to be the son being of his own class, of his own kind of generation. It comes from the Greek word ginomai, which just means to generate something, to have a child. So the idea there is that the son is an only unique kind of son of God, different to the kinds of sons of God that we are, because we're sons of God by participating in God, whereas the son is the son of God naturally and essentially as being from the Father. So the term just became a noun to explain that sort of uniquing from the Father.
Say that they did exactly what I predicted in the opening statement. They wouldn't address the Trinity at all and the clear logical contradiction of the Trinity that everyone is aware of. They had to bring up these unrelated issues like the uncreatedness of the Quran, or that God, Allah has hands, for example. This has nothing to do with monotheism. Maybe they don't understand what Tawhid means. Tawhid means one God. It means monotheism. And this is the claim that we're making, that polytheism is the Trinity. The Trinity is polytheism. So tell me how. I want them to explain, since their whole opening statement was bringing up the issue of the uncreatedness of the Quran and the hand of Allah. How does that contradict monotheism? How does God having a hand?
He didn't understand the point of the Allah having a hand. If Allah has a body, as Daniel's theology declares, then he exists in space. So now you have space, you have some sort of world that Allah is inhabiting, and so you end up with all these things that are co-eternal with Allah. They have the divine attribute of eternality. So you have multiple eternal beings. And what's that mean? Are they eternally uncreated, or is Allah eternally generating space? What's going on here? And they don't understand. They're complaining, oh, you haven't defended or explained the Trinity. No, you guys at the very beginning, you said that this is polytheism. All they did was say, following your exact methodology when we apply it to your sources, then you'd have to declare that you guys are polytheists too, which means what? Which means drop the objection that if you have distinctions within something, therefore it has to be a bunch of separate beings. Either drop that objection or declare yourselves polytheists. But under no circumstances do you get to apply this reasoning to Christianity and say it's polytheistic and then say, oh, ignore our own theology and what would happen if you applied the same reasoning. That's it. So guys, that's all that's happening. The Christian side said, here's what you guys said. Let's apply it to your own sources. Are you polytheists? And what are they going to want to say? We're not polytheists. You guys are polytheists because we're going to apply this standard to you and not to ourselves. And so we're just going to be inconsistent hypocrites, which is what dawah is.
However, you want to explain that hand. It has nothing to do, by the way, with Salafi or the other theological schools of Kalam in Islam.
Yeah, it does.
All of the schools are united on this. All Muslims are united on this.
Wait, what?
God having a hand does not mean that the hand has its own mind, that the hand is its own entity, its own God, its own person.
So, wait, hold on, pause.
Let me. Oh,
who wants to go first? Let's do things in order.
Okay, so I have a quote here from Hamza Yusuf, one of my favorite tools in these discussions. He has a book on the creed of Imam al-Tahawi, which is supposed to express a classical Islamic understanding of Allah. And Hamza Yusuf is a classical Ash'ari, so he doesn't hold to Daniel's Aqidah, but he also doesn't hold to the Mu'tazila Aqidah that denies Allah having attributes. So he'd say Allah has attributes, but he would reinterpret the statements that are otherwise taken anthropomorphically by people like Daniel. But he's talking about the history of the debate between the early Mu'tazili who denied Allah has attributes and the Ash'aris that came along and says, no, he does have attributes. Listen to what he says here. He says, the Mu'tazila insisted that God's attributes had no existence distinguishable from his essence. So there are not separate attributes. They're simply a description of Allah's eternal being. Their negation of God's attributes arose from their concern regarding the Sunni position. So by Sunni here, he means the Ash'aris. So they were concerned about something in the Sunni position. What was their concern? He goes on, the Sunnis in turn responded to the Mu'tazila, arguing that the attributes were in addition to the essence in such a way as to be neither the essence nor other than the essence. Now, try and wrap your head around that for a minute. That doesn't sound simple to me. They're not the essence nor other than the essence. But he goes on, not the essence nor other than the essence. This was a supra-rational attempt at avoiding the polytheism of which the Mu'tazili accused them. So, in other words, the Mu'tazili who said Allah has no attributes were accusing the Sunnis, the Ash'aris who say Allah has attributes, of polytheism. And he goes on, he says, but he calls it a supra-rational attempt at avoiding that charge. So this is Hamza Yusuf. This is his position. He's saying it was a supra-rational. In other words, it is not strictly speaking rational. It is not something within the sphere of comprehensible by ordinary intellectual means. That's what he's saying. It transcends logic. Now, I'm not, opposing something simply because it's super rational, but the point is, Daniel's the one saying that their position is simple, and ours is not understandable in terms of simple logic and so forth. So how is it that their position is, in its very essence, supra-rational, according to Hamza Yusuf, and yet that's not problematic? But by the way, when he goes on to talk about this further, it ends up not really being supra-rational, but altogether contradictory. Here's what he says. This is the last part of this. He says, theology is a mental activity by nature and often involves paradoxes in which, now this sounds good at first, in which seemingly insoluble problems are dialectically entertained in the mind of the theologian. He goes on to say, for this reason, true theology is, to a certain degree, the squaring of a circle within an enlightened mind. So the enlightened mind of people like Hamza Yusuf engage in squaring circles. Sorry, that's not what we mean by supra-rational, something that goes beyond our ability to fully understand. That's contradictory. That's irrational.
And what do you want to say, Sig?
No, what I wanted to say, particularly when it comes to whether this idea is rational, whether this idea is not rational, right, is that there isn't an actual objective standard for determining whether something is rational or not. So when you read the creeds of like Ibn Taymiyyah, or you read the creeds of other theologians that like make work on this, like for example, the Hanabila, right? There's an entire history book on the Hanabila from Ahmed ibn Hanbal and the other Hanbalis that come. When it comes to them saying something is rational, for them, it is enough that the Quran says it. So if the Quran says it, it has to be rational. Even if there is evidence or an argument that actually suggests its irrationality, they will just say, look, that argument has to be wrong for some reason. And although there is no reason why the argument is wrong, it's wrong precisely because Allah revealed it. Whereas in contrast to this, we believe that actually, even if a human personally cannot work out the problem of the Trinity, quote, quote, someone else will be able to, because it's not illogical. Someone is going to be able to just apply logic better than us. A computer could be able to do it. Things of this nature. Whereas when it comes to Allah literally having a hand, or Allah metaphorically having a hand, there's nothing rational as to why Allah has to have 2 hands rather than 3, rather than 5. For all we know, Allah could have an infinite number of hands. We don't know the number of hands that Allah has. We know that He has 2, and we know that at least one of those hands has 2 fingers. You know, these are the problems that we do see when we're faced with this creed. And more importantly, Haqiqatjou is doing a personal incredulity fallacy the entire time, which is that because I personally don't really understand what you're saying, because I personally haven't exhausted the philosophical literature, because I personally am not prepared for this debate, then unfortunately your opinion is wrong. Now, this is different from, Occam's razor, which is the law of parsimony. That is that we shouldn't multiply entities. We shouldn't multiply the number of entities for an explanation. We should only put forward what we absolutely need to explain a thing, right? Now, with the Trinity, we would put forward the treatise on it, right? We would put forward a lot of ink on it because we think that's necessary to articulate the doctrine. Whereas for Daniel Haqiqatjou, no matter how many works they write, they can never square what it means for Allah to be one without breaking the very rules that they put in place.
Yeah, indeed. And so, in other words, what you're just talking about is basically, is Daniel saying which is standard dawah. Hey, we can't get this, therefore it's not true. Again, I mean, apply that to cosmology or something like that. You couldn't be a Muslim cosmologist if that's your thinking. But so the idea, guys, is the Trinity is true whether or not Daniel Haqiqatjou gets it, whether or not any Dawa guy gets it, whether any Christian understands it. It's if God is a Trinity, then God is a Trinity. And so you take all the stuff that was just brought up about Islam, about Allah. So you've got Allah, you've got Allah's spirit, you've got Allah's speech, but the speech of Allah appears as a man. The spirit appears in the form of a man. And then within the one man that the Quran appears as, there are 114 separate chapters that also appear as personal agents who intercede and so on. I look at this and I go, I do not understand this. You would have questions like, okay, so when the Quran intercedes with Allah, since that's the speech of Allah, is that Allah talking to himself, or are they separate beings? What's going on here? Guess what? I don't understand it. I would not say, therefore it's false. If I had good reasons to believe that God revealed that, I would say, okay, it doesn't matter if I don't understand how all these 114 different chapters speaking and then coming together like Voltron. If God revealed it, I would say, okay, it doesn't matter if I get it or not. God revealed it, and I'll try to understand it. But even if I don't, if that's what God revealed, then that's what God revealed. Whereas these guys will just say, oh, the Trinity is confusing to us, therefore it's stupid and false. I was like, wait a minute, if you guys are saying that's false because it's confusing, hence, this is why Sam brings in all these things about Islam that are massively confusing. And this is an embarrassment, man. Dawah is one massive embarrassment. Dawah is one massive slap in the face to rationality. Let's go ahead and see where Daniel. I'll let Daniel finish up here.
Theologian has ever said that. There's no challenge to monotheism of Islam by bringing up the hand or the Quran or anything like that.
Sure.
Or the shin, and again, like Ijaz said it perfectly,
115
God, like separate gods with minds. The Quran doesn't have its own mind.
That is time. Okay.
Okay, pause.
The
Right?
Quran doesn't have its own mind, and yet the Quran appears as a man, speaks to people, and intercedes on behalf of people with Allah. So it's doing all this without a mind. It's speaking, remembering, because it remembers the things these people did. It's keeping record. So the Quran appears in the form of a man, speaks as a pale man, intercedes for people as a man, recounts what they've done and does all of this without a mind. So now what Daniel is saying is the Quran, which has no mind, does all the things that only someone with a mind does, and yet so the Quran is simultaneously mindless and does all the things that have a mind. This is exactly what we're talking about, guys. You have massively confusing things within your theology. You pretend that they don't exist, and you attack the Trinity and say, this doesn't make sense. This is hard to understand. This can't be true. And then when someone applies the exact same criticisms to you, you flip out and whine and claim to be victims here.
Hey, Anthony, you wanted to say something, right? Go ahead.
Again, you have the arbitrariness factor, because just like before, they set up these standards. You have to have 4 verses to describe your entire theology, or it's not true. And that's an arbitrary standard, right? Well, now Haqiqatjou is saying that these things have to be personal. They have to have a mind in order for them to be true deities. But who said that's true? Now, you've already said that's not the case. This thing is acting like a person. In fact, all these chapters are acting like persons. They have the attributes that we use to identify a person, but assume it's not the case. Assume they're eternal, but they're mindless. That doesn't remove it from the realm of polytheism. Ancient pagans had all sorts of entities in their system that weren't personal, that compromised the absoluteness of no being in their system could be ultimately absolute. Well, at least many of the systems of classical paganism. They had an eternal world. They had matter existing, right? The God that shaped it might be distinct from it and be called a God, but the thing that he's shaping is an entity of its own. And it was also imbued with divinity in many of these systems. They did think of these things as deities. They thought of even the gods ultimately coming from some of these impersonal realities. So the gods that are personal were coming from impersonal realities that are more basic than them, right? Eternal, whereas these gods are coming into being. And so you might not call them gods, but I mean, again, they were considered gods in ancient paganism. The earth was considered a god. Water was considered a god. The heavens were considered a god, and that was true whether they were personalized or not.
I mean, to touch on that point as well about, and I really want people to understand what Daniel Haqiqatjou is trying to do as well. Again, if we go back, guys, make sure you play the stream back. But if you go back to the stream, remember the two criteria we gave for failing monotheism, right? Number one was composition, and the other one was polytheism. So Daniel Haqiqatjou, even if you want to say, well, they're not separate minds, that they don't have their own mind, even though they all do the things which are necessary of a mind, by the way, since you can't remember without having an intellect. Otherwise, you could say that this could remember, right? This is from my McDonald's 2 days ago. Okay, don't ask me to clean my room. Like this, right? This could remember for you, right? Because there's nothing stopping it from doing that. Whereas you could say that your phone has memory, right? In an analogous sense, no? You could say your phone has memory, right? And that doesn't have a mind. So you could say that the Quran can remember without having a mind. But the problem here is we're using actually this metaphorically. You believe it's a real thing that happens in the intellect. So if the Quran is able to intercede, it's able to argue, it's not like it's just praising God. It's doing something contrary, in a sense, subalternately to God. So when you intercede, right, Anthony can correct me here, when I intercede to David on the behalf of Anthony, I'm actually doing something against David's decreed will that he wants to do. So let's say David wants to slap Anthony, and I say, no, David, don't do that. Don't slap Anthony's. Wouldn't be the first time. You know, would it be the first time that I had to intercede, right? Don't slap his face, please. Do not slap his face. You will end up like Muhammad Hijab. Don't do it. Don't do it. And David says, I don't care. Okay, I followed the sunnah. And then he slaps him anyway. But what I've done with interceding is I have actually posited something against. I'm arguing against David's position. Abraham does it when he says, look, don't destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. Don't do this. Of course, it's, theologically within the will of God, but just narratologically, within the narrative, this is what's going on. And so if the Quran is able to argue, it's able to have its own opinion. It's able to have its own opinion on something that is different from Allah. When you are interceding, you are in the narrative, narratologically, going against the ideals of someone who otherwise would just carry on with their action. You're trying to subvert their action, turn it away from what it's trying to do. So when the Quran is interceding, it's doing something intellectually different to what Allah would have wanted to do, which would be to send the person to hell. And so with that being said, now the argument can be established with all these premises before that the Quran has a different mind because it has a different intellectual landscape. But even if that wasn't the case, it is still an existing thing that is different from Allah himself. Remember, they are not him. Now, to be other than him means to be separate, right? According to the Taymi's, to be other than Allah is to be separate from Allah. Again, they are not Allah. And because of that, chat, that would mean that they are two existing things that exist in reality that are not the whole of what Allah is. That contradicts monotheism. There you go.
And once again, applying their own reasoning. If individual chapters of the Quran, individual surahs, appear as these flocks that intercede on behalf of people and who remember what these individual people did so that they can intercede with Allah, what does that mean? It means that Surah 2 interacting with SIIIG has different knowledge than Surah 5 interacting with Anthony, which means they have different knowledge. And according to Daniel's own argument, this means that they are separate beings with separate minds and separate wills. And so if this is all eternal, you have a bunch of eternal existences that are separate from each other and are separate beings. How is
and they are all necessary.
And they're all
They're
necessary.
all necessary.
They're all necessary. So again, this is Daniel. This entire debate so far, it looks like this debate's just going to be, here's our standard and here's our methodology. Okay, let's apply this to you. No, don't apply this to us. That looks like this is what the entire discussion is going to be.
Yeah,
don't apply the reasoning that we just applied to you. Do not flip that back on us. Don't, or we'll whine and cry. All right, let's see what happens.
I will turn it over to Team Christianity here. This is the bottom of the first round here. Billsy, we got the timer for them. 4 minutes again on the clock. And when you guys start speaking, we'll start the clock once you start speaking. Do you going to ask something, Sam?
Jay, do you want to go or you want me to go?
Let me have 1 or 2 minutes, and then I'll throw it to you. So I did want to address what Daniel said, because, of course, he misstated several things about what our position is. Mm-hmm. First of all, the argument about attributes was not that you believe that they're persons. Sam was making an analogy to show that you have the exact same problem in your position, and you have a double standard when you try to say that we have to solve this Trinitarian dilemma. It's a contradiction. But your view of the attributes is not subject to that problem. That's just a double standard. What's the point? Nobody said that you believe that the attributes are persons, so that's a misdirection. First of all, didn't Haqiqatjou already admit that Paul taught the Trinity? And I think Ijaz disagreed with that. So which one is it? Did Paul teach the Trinity or did he not? And then I would also add that Christ does not have a human person, and that's why the notion about divine mind is a two-mind scenario where he shares a divine mind with the Father, and he has limitations in his human mind. That's why it's two minds. So you tried to say that he had one mind and it was separate knowledge. The expression where he says that he's limited in knowledge is a reference to rhetoric. And if you can read St. Basil, letter 234, 5, and 6, he talks about these issues and explains that just as Jesus says in other places that there's no one good but God, he's not literally saying that there's no one else good, because in other passages he calls himself good. He calls the Holy Spirit good as well. And so it's a feature of rhetoric. You have the same types of expressions in your own Quranic exegesis where you try to solve these dilemmas, but you don't want us to have that right. Sam, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, notice how Daniel conveniently wants to evade what the topic is. The topic is Trinity versus Tawhid. But I know he can't defend Tawhid because it's irrational. So he just wants to attack the Trinity.
Why does Daniel Daniel always gets this nervous grin when everyone catches him out. He gets this big smile on his face. And it's like, it seems like that's, if you ever caught him in a nursery school or something like that, that'd be the smile on his face.
Thinking that Tawhid wins by default. Daniel, you're the one who set up the topic, Trinity versus Tawhid. You didn't want to do it separately, so stop whining about it. Now, coming back.
Oh, that's funny. So Daniel's the one who wanted it set up Trinity versus Tawhid, and then when in a debate, and then in the debate, Muslims just say, "Yeah, Trinity. Trinity. That's confusing. Let me spend my entire time showing that the Trinity is irrational, and we'll just assume that Tawhid makes perfect sense." And then the Christians go after Tawhid, and then they complain, "Oh, he's attacking Tawhid instead of explaining the Trinity." These guys are a joke, man. It's a total joke.
You know the craziest thing about this whole thing as well is there was 4 topics, right? There was 3 topics that Sam Shamoun actually wanted to bring. And I went on the Twitter and I was checking all of this out, right? Mm-hmm. He wanted to debate, okay, does Muhammad believe in like the Bible? So he was like, look, does the Quran confirm the Bible? Like, what's Muhammad's view of the Bible? Does the Quran teach the Trinity? And does the Bible teach the Trinity? Those are the 3 topics. Now, we all of us know Sam is not a metaphysician. He's not a philosopher. He doesn't do this. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So it would be redunculous to debate him on it because that's just not his interest. Okay? Now we have guys that would like to debate on the metaphysics of the Trinity. Dyer debated him and cooked him, right? It got to the point that someone made a ChatGPT AI photo of it.
Khalil cooked him, and Khalil's a Muslim.
Oh no, Khalil.
Jake.
Oh, guys, if you
cooked
haven't
Jake on the
seen
same
that
thing.
Debate, oh my gosh, guys, because I was there in the like pre-game for this. Like I was with Khalil and like his boys like doing this. Like all of us, David, there was so much lore about Clubhouse debating that you're not aware of. And I was like in the thick of it. Like there was a whole time where Jake was like a Quran only guy for a long time, right? And then he started becoming like a Muslim and getting a bit popular with the LPT. And Muslims kept like harassing Christians, Jewish guys, and Shia, right? The Sunnis just kept harassing us. And so we all just got together and said, you know what? We're actually all monotheists. Like, why are we taking this? Like, we're all monotheists. Let's just make a pact to not debate each other and just focus on like the Sunni terror right here, like the Sunni weirdness that's going on. Let's just focus on that. And then we just all just started like cooking the Sunnis like simultaneously. It was the craziest thing that ever happened, right? Because like we just got tired of the Muslims like doxing us over and over and over again. And so we were like, you know what? We're just not even going to fight amongst ourselves. Let's actually just deal with the polytheists, that is the Sunnis over here. And we did that for a long time, right? Got to the point that Jake wanted to debate Khalil and Danny. Now, bear in mind, Khalil and Danny isn't a small fry. He understands traditional metaphysics. He's good at this. At this point in time, Jake is still taking online Arabic classes to try to get better. Now, Jake will probably make a video saying, I didn't take online Arabic classes. I'm actually amazing at Arabic. Look at me recite the Quran. Jake, go ahead. I truly don't care. I'm being superfluous here. Jake then debated Khalil and Danny on the topic, okay? And there was a lot riding on this because Jake was saying, oh, I'm going to show how Shia Islam is kufr, da-da-da-da-da. Khalil and Danny dog walked Jake. I'm not even lying. Like, as a person that has no say in this, Khalil and Danny dog walked Jake. It got to the point that Jake had to do 10 live streams explaining why in the next 3 months, why he didn't lose the debate. Like, he just started going on a cope sesh for 3 months. And to this day, with Jake having, I don't know, like 100K subs, people still bring up the fact that Khalil beat him. That's how bad it is, David. It was an insane debate. So, guys, if you haven't already, go and watch Khalil and Danny's debate with Jake the Muzzy. If you want to know why Jake doesn't want to debate me, it's because he said that he hates me because I am a kafir and I'm spreading kufr. That's specifically what he said.
Oh, yeah. That's a good explanation. Yeah, it's a good one. Good one to use. Funny.
The issue, maybe you didn't hear what I said. The Quran must have a mind independent from your God if the Quran is going to argue with your God and the individual chapters. Here, Sahih Muslim, book 4, number 1757.
Oh, nice.
Abu Umama said he heard Allah's messenger say, recite the Quran, for on the day of resurrection, it will come as an intercessor for those who recite it. How does the speech of Allah intercede with Allah if it's a speech of Allah? Is Allah speaking to himself in a different mode? Then you are a modalist. So your Tawhid is modalism. But then it gets worse for you. Recite the two bright ones, Al-Baqarah and Surah Imran, chapters 2 and 3. For on the day of resurrection, they will come as two clouds or two shades or two flocks of birds in ranks, pleading for those who recite them. Pleading with who? With themselves? If the surahs of the Quran can appear independently, separately, and appear in visible form, and argue with Allah, that's either your God being schizophrenic, arguing with himself in different modes, so you're a modalist, or you have now separate gods arguing with one another, so you're a polytheist, or you have to believe that Tawhid encompasses a plurality of distinct entities who can then interact and argue with one another. So don't run and evade with your smoke and mirror tactics. Deal with the issue. You didn't understand what I meant about your God's body parts, even though you don't like to use the term body parts. And no, not all the Sunnis define the hand of Allah as meaning what you mean, because you have those that say that it's a metaphor for his power. You do not believe this. So I'm still trying to figure out, do you believe in a finite God who assumes time and space? Because if he has a hand, two right hands, what happened to his left? Maybe you can explain. He has a shin, he has loins. That means he's an embodied being. If he's an embodied being, he requires space. Unless you want to create another contradiction with your irrational Salafi anthropomorphism.
So, guys, that was that's exactly what we were saying. It's and look, you can already see Daniel looking like, no, this is not. He broke it down for you. Bringing up the body parts, Daniel, was not, oh, you must believe that this hand is a separate God or something like that. That was to bring up that if Allah has a physical body, then Allah exists in some sort of space. And therefore, if Allah has always had a body, then there's always been this space. And you're ending up with lots of things that are eternal, lots of things that are eternal. And that's in addition to all the other problems. But I mean, imagine the entire response to pointing out that the Quran intercedes for people and individual chapters of the Quran intercede for people. The Quran appears as a man to intercede for people. And then the entire response was, but that's not us. They don't have a mind. We're not saying that these things have a mind. What do you mean? Speaking and remembering and interceding and pleading and talking and arguing. What are you saying this doesn't have a mind? What are you talking about? What do you mean by mind? And so it's just another example of, okay, it's doing all the things that are associated with the mind, but it's mindless. And so that's at the core of that's part of your theology. mindless things, having talking and arguing and so on, and remembering.
By the way,
and speaking.
Notice how this necessarily means that these attributes are something other than Allah. If they're identical with Allah, then you couldn't say they're mindless.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if they're mindless, then they're definitely other than Allah. So you have on your hands, with Allah's attributes, a plurality of eternal entities. That's polytheism all by itself.
Yeah, they take Allah. So other than Allah for them means separate. So we usually think other than God just means like something that's not God, like something that's not identical. So we take identical, non-identical, like that's the dichotomy we take. But for them, they think that there is Allah, other than Allah, meaning separate, and then this middle category meaning distinct and not separate, which is where Christians can just say, look, yeah, we believe that, the Son isn't other than God. The Son is God. He's just not identical to the Father. He is distinct and not separate. So that is how the Taymis understand that other than Allah stuff. It took me some time to get that as well, but yeah, it's okay.
Take a couple super chats real quick, and let's see. Which companion of Muhammad said something along the lines of that even if he had one foot in heaven or their vision, he would still not be sure if he made it because of Allah being best of deceivers? That was Abu Bakr. That was Abu Bakr, Muhammad's closest companion and his father-in-law, because Abu Bakr's daughter was Aisha. So yes, this was Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr, who, interestingly, was one of a handful of people that Muhammad guaranteed would be in paradise. Muhammad guaranteed Abu Bakr would be in paradise. And what does Abu Bakr say? If I had one foot in paradise, I would still fear Allah's makr, Allah's deception, right? In other words, I'd still be worried that he's just tricking me. And now you might be wondering, how could a Muslim who's been guaranteed paradise by Muhammad himself say, I still am not completely convinced? Because he knows that Allah had deceived the Muslim community even through Muhammad. This is in Surah 8. It's the Battle of Badr. It's the Battle of Badr. The polytheists of Mecca are on their way to protect their caravan, and Muhammad has a dream in which only a few people are there. Only a few people show up to the battle. And so he delivers this to his followers. Guys, I had a dream. These guys, they're not a lot of guys showing up, and so we can actually go out and beat them. And the Muslims, yay, we can go beat them because there's not a lot of them. They go out and they're actually outnumbered. A bunch of polytheists showed up, and so then Allah has to tell them in Surah 8, yeah, I tricked you through Muhammad's dream, but it was because I knew you wouldn't go out and fight unless I tricked you. And so if you absorb the idea of a God who just tricks you to get you to do things, then you have to wonder, okay, when he guarantees me paradise through his prophet, just as he told us that there's not a lot of people showing up to this battle through his prophet, and that was a lie to get us to behave in a certain way, how do I know that he's not promising that I'm in paradise through this prophet just to get me to do certain things, but he's actually going to throw me into hell? How do I know? You don't. You're dealing with an omnipotent deceiver, and so you end up with these kinds of issues. So yes, that is Abu Bakr, my friend. Mr. Tree says, we spoke about what hijab is like in real life, but in real life, SIIIG, God Logic, and David are also down to earth and treat you like family, such lovely guys. That's true. Notice Mr. Tree did not mention Anthony. Why? Because Anthony treats people like terrible garbage. Allah left Islam and is Hubal, the moon god, again. Indeed.
I just want to say that was very nice of you, David.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm always here. I'm always here to support. Video game controller dances. Oh, that's a super sticker. I'm sitting there reading it like it was a comment. By the way, thank you for this early stream. Loving this. Yes, we do love our European viewers, and we want to jump on there live every once in a while. Doesn't the Quran translate the word begotten?
But actually, that just makes me think, if Ijaz is arguing that the word begotten, monogenes in Scripture, isn't, as it's always been understood, derived from the term monos, meaning one, and the word meaning begotten, but it just means unique or one of a kind, then the Quran is not actually contradicting the Christian doctrine there. So he ends up losing what he considers, in other contexts, a good argument from the Quranic perspective against the deity of Christ. But Yeah, I mean, notice though that the author of the Quran assumes that he's speaking against some position. So, is the author of the Quran
ever what? Sorry.
Is he ever addressing the Christian position? Right. If the word begotten is not what what our theology says, because the word doesn't mean that according to Ijaz, then the Quran is not even addressing us.
Right. I mean, here's what I would say to that as well, to even build on that, right? Has anyone thought what makes Christianity unique in its discussions against Islam? Like when you think of the worldview of Christianity, have you thought about what makes it unique against Islam? I think it's because Islam is pure. Like when people like the Salafi apologists do this, like Islam is purely reactionary. It's purely reactive, as in they don't build a positive theology in themselves. Even with the debate, if you give the Muslims the chance to speak first, they don't ever build a coherent Islamic position. What they do is they just attack another position.
And that's built into Islam, because the Quran is like that too, right? I mean, the Quran. James White pointed this out for years, that Islam can't even define itself without attacking Christianity in the process, right? Like in their verses in the Quran that are talking about what Allah is, it's specifically He begets not, nor is He begot. He's attacking other positions and so on. So Allah can't even define Himself without attacking Christianity. So it's built into the system. It's built into the system. Attack everyone else's position, and then you kind of win by default. Until someone who comes along and applies your same standards to you, and then you cry like babies over it.
The crazy thing is, that was actually an apologetic move explicitly said by Asrar al-Rashid. So Asrar al-Rashid literally went on Blogging Theology and said, look, let's take all the major religions, and process of elimination, Islam must be the truth. What? Maybe let's say we have some parts of Christianity that's true, and some parts of Judaism that's true. I say Judaism, or some part of Jainism that's true. And we could just, construct a conglomerate theology, a bundle theology of all these different belief systems that do have parts of truth. Technically, that would be a truer option than Islam if we did the process of elimination thing, because technically there's nothing false in them. Because you've just taken all the things that are technically true about them and have basically created this conglomerate religion. And so Asrar al-Rashid, this process of elimination doesn't necessarily work, in my opinion, because ultimately it's not building something positive. It's just trying to negate other things. It's like a Maimonides via negativa, which never actually leads to something positive about religion, which is a problem.
Halal Prophet says, little guy's tell is he blinks constantly when he lies. I'm guessing he's talking about Ijaz there. I'll pay attention. I'll pay attention for that.
Then he must always be blinking.
Yeah.
No, he literally is. Yeah.
Yeah, guys. Seriously, we know there are people who will just side with their debater and so on. I mean, Muslims who are watching, on what planet do you think these guys are doing a bang up job of being completely hypocritical and then pretending that you can't apply their own and then just constantly making things up? Oh yeah, everything's simple and we're all on the same page in Islam, and no, you're not. And we'll apply this to Christianity, but then we'll pretend you can't apply it to our own sources, and then you brought up Allah's body parts, and then we'll completely misrepresent what you're saying. We act like, if you say Allah has hands, then you're saying that his hand has a mind, so it's a different. No, it's bringing up that there are other uncreated things in Islam. So we won't understand anything you're saying. We won't be consistent under any circumstances, and we'll lie about the entire history of Islam. And we'll just make up rules, like if you don't say all of your theology in 4 verses, then it's ruled out and it's false. And they just make up all these. Anyway, it's like, guys, who thinks the Muslim side is doing a great job here? Muslims, do you think they're doing a great job? Couple more.
Well, the Christians couldn't address anything. Therefore, the Muslims won by default. Come on.
That's how it works. Word became flesh equals begotten son. We invented 3-in-1 shower products, so do Muslims think Old Spice is more powerful than Allah? You've got 3-in-1. It's shampoo, conditioner, and body wash all in one, and therefore more powerful than Allah. Who would have thought a simple trio of a hillbilly, a homeless guy, and a 7-Eleven robber could destroy these Dawa clowns so easily? Way to go, guys. I'll let viewers decide who is who in that description. Adam says, does the Quran bluntly say Muslims are just Allah's slaves at any point? Yes. Surah 19 verse 93 says that no one comes to Allah as anything but a slave. And finally here, being as charitable as possible, could the not Allah and not separate of Allah be some kind of weird panentheism? What do you think about this, Anthony?
Panentheism. Do you want to comment on this?
Well, so, I mean, Muslims could try to explain these things in various ways.
I don't think that's what they mean, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there are schools within schools here. Where SIIIG can tell you. I mean, we're dumbing this down because Daniel has pleaded with us not to talk over his third grade level. But when we talk about the Mu'tazili, for example, who said Allah has no attributes, there were schools of thought. There were different factions within the Mu'tazili. When we talk about the Athari Aqidah, there are factions within that. The same thing within the Asharis and the Maturidis. These things split into 1,000 different groups. The other day, I had a guy on my channel that was saying something about because I disagreed with another person who is also identified as a Christian. See, this proves Christianity false because you guys have these disagreements. And I said, wait a minute. Your prophet said that the Jews split up into 72 sects, 71 or 72. The source says, it's not very fixed there. And then it says the same thing about the Christians, 71 or 72 sects. But then Muhammad says, my ummah will split up into 73 sects.
We're strong.
So Muhammad, if they're all divided, Muhammad's saying my group more so.
Yeah.
So,
and only one of those groups is the truth.
Yeah. They're not. Yeah, he's not saying they're all this one big happy, even if divided family. They're all wrong except for one of them. So, I mean, I could imagine some group of Muslims interpreting it in a panentheistic way, but I mean, that's not what Daniel's going to say, I would think. I mean,
no.
You don't know what Daniel's going to say. I mean, ultimately, this is the next thing that people even need to consider when it comes to this, this stuff about the attributes being other than him and things like this. So panentheism is the idea that the universe is in the soul of God. So pantheism is the idea that God is everything, pan, right, in Greek meaning everything. Panentheism is the idea that the universe is within the soul of God. I remember years ago, Inspiring Philosophy tried to do this sort of connection with the Eastern Orthodox theology of the essence energies distinction, some things on that. But that's the sort of idea. In order for them to say it's a weak panentheism, you would have to say that the universe is those attributes of Allah, which of course the Muslims are going to deny. Now, this is just a set of entities, a conglomerate of existing entities that make up what Allah is ultimately. And a good question you could ask is this: Allah has an essence or that, right? Is that essence the same as Allah's existence or not? That's the question you should ask him. Is what Allah is the same as the fact that Allah exists? If they are not the same, if existence is an attribute of Allah, then that means Allah's essence relies on his attribute of existence to exist. Because this attribute of existence is not the essence. The essence of Allah does not have the attribute of existence. It is not the same. So that's a question you could ask them as well. Go ahead, guys.
All right, guys, we actually have to wrap up in a few minutes because I have something else coming up in a little bit on AP's channel. But we'll watch a little bit of Daniel's response, Daniel and Ijaz's response to see, it looks like Daniel's about to speak, to see if they actually just complain and pretend that their sources don't say these things or that they didn't just use these methods and standard against Christianity. We'll see what he says.
I'm guessing the latter.
Still 20 on the clock. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I didn't know because I'm trying to speak fast, making time. So yeah, Daniel, remember what the topic is. I know maybe sometimes being a little intimidated, you forget Trinity versus Tawhid.
10 seconds.
Don't run from shouldering the burden of proof.
Yeah, again, that's just amazing. Daniel wants Trinity versus Tawhid. Daniel comes out attacking the Trinity. Sam uses the exact same arguments that Daniel used to show that, hey, your arguments would destroy Tawhid, and then Daniel and Ijaz whine that they attacked Tawhid. This is just pathetic.
All right. So I will turn it back. That completes round one. on well,
No, that's it.
yeah, the first set of rounds. We're going to go into round 2 of this. I'm going to turn it back to Team Islam here.
Team Islam
again with
World Sharia
Tawhid versus
Police.
the Trinity. Daniel, I'll turn it back to you, or EF, or either one of you that wants to take it for
Yep,
4 minutes on the clock.
Go ahead,
Yeah, I'll
Ijaz.
take this. Yep. So this is quite simple. How is it possible that they don't understand that the Quran also uses rhetoric? In fact, in the Quran, Allah says he uses examples of every kind. So it's not that hard to understand it. But there is a problem here for Jay, because Jay seems to think that in Mark 13:32, this is simple rhetoric. Unfortunately, the scribes of the Bible, they don't see it that way, which is why they had to repeatedly change this verse over several centuries. They clearly saw a problem with it. If there was no problem, why did the scribes change it? Unfortunately, Jay describes factual.
Wait, if the scribes changed it, why do we have it?
Disagree with you.
Yeah.
Well,
He's claiming there are certain textual variants, but that's hardly adequate. All of them speak of the Father only knowing. So there, anyways.
Also, that's not even the topic of discussion. We're not talking about textual variants here. We're supposed to be talking about Tawhid.
Yeah, but I mean, it's irrelevant too to the issue of. He's saying somebody later had a problem. Well, maybe the people later that had a problem that introduced some textual variants didn't understand the idiom. What he has to do is show that this is actually what Jay's answer was to the issue is not actually true, right? Jay argued that this is an example of rhetoric, right? Like when Jesus said, nobody's good but God alone. It's understood in the context that he's not denying his own inherent goodness. He's affirmed it elsewhere. And it's ultimately affirmed in that very context, because he goes on to say, if you want to really be good, you got to forsake everything and follow me. If you're going to follow him, then he must be good, right? So he's arguing that that's what it means in its original context. Ijaz is arguing somebody centuries later had trouble with this and so introduced a textual variant. That doesn't refute Jay's observation. It just shows somebody later may not have understood the idiom, may not have understood it as rhetoric. And so
Also,
but
to add to that as well, and this is the final thing I'm going to say on the issue, he is quoting Basil. So for those of you that don't know, Basil of Caesarea, otherwise known as Basil the Great, is one of the greatest Greek theologians that the church has. He's an amazing person. And when he was asked this question, he says that, look, the way that we traditionally read this had the addition of the word first. So not in the text, but in its meaning. So usually we wouldn't just say no one knows the day or the hour. The Greeks would say no one knows the day or the hour first. And the reason why he adds that is because of actually the no one is good but God verse, as Jay points out. Of course, no one is good first but God, because you have many things in the Bible that are good. Okay? Many things in the Bible. Christ himself calls himself the good shepherd. Many things are good. Okay? However, since the Father is the first good in the Trinity, right? The Son is the second good in that sense. And so the Father, when he begets the Son, not to speak of times, is when he begets the Son logically, the Son obviously receives his goodness from the Father. Now, he also says that in Greek, right, the actual Greek text does not say except. It says if not.
if not, yeah.
And the word is ami. And we actually have verses like in Mark, where it says, if he's not from God, he would not be able to do miracles. But obviously, that's not saying that Christ can't do miracles. It's saying that because he's from God, he can do miracles. Now, in Greek, if I said this in English, David, if I said, no one can come into my house, not Anthony, not David, if not for SIIIG, what does that mean in English?
It would mean they can come in as long as you are too.
Good, right? And that's the same understanding used in Greek, right? I would share my screen, but it's okay. That's the same understanding used in Greek. It says, amen. You guys fact check this. Okay? So it says, neither the angels nor the Son, if not the Father only. Meaning that since the Father knows the hour, presumably, the Son would know the hour. And you'll notice in the other manuscript for Matthew, it doesn't contain the Son passage, meaning that it's most likely just denying the angels having knowledge of the hour and humans having knowledge of the hour. But actually in Greek, Like literally, the Son would have to have knowledge of the hour because the Father has knowledge. So that's the interpretation I take. I take the Basilian view because I think it's just the most accurate to the text. But Anthony's view is also just as valid, by the way. The church accepts all of them.
Yeah, there's a number of views represented in the patristic writings, that being one, the if not interpretation. The one thing that I usually try and steer people away from is trying to explain it in terms of the hypostatic union, because that doesn't resolve things in a Trinitarian way. You still have to account for the Spirit, right? So if you say nobody knows the day or the hour, not the angels, but the Son, not the angels nor the Son, the Father alone, and you say the Son doesn't know it because of his human nature, well, that would leave out the Spirit. So the answer that you give has to be consistent with a fully Trinitarian
Yeah, like the triadology, yeah.
So the if not interpretation of the Greek works, the recognition of the word know being used idiomatically in Hebrew culture for making known. Paul uses it that way. The context is about Jesus returning for his bride. There are other ways of dealing with this. And you find all this represented in patristic sources. Sometimes, surprisingly, you even have fathers just saying he doesn't know, even though they're affirming the absolute deity. But I'm just saying that it's represented there. For these guys to pretend that it's this insoluble thing, when Christians not only have an answer, we've got several, right? All of which work grammatically.
All of which don't contradict, by the way. They're all part of the same deposit. All of them are. So make sure that, guys, whenever you see multiple Christian interpretations, that is not to say that these interpretations contradict. In fact, our religion is so expansive, it's so mature, right? It's not for babies. It's so mature that we actually have a litany of different ways to understand just one verse. When the Bible says, God created the heavens and the earth, yeah, of course, that means that God is the cause of everything, that God causes everything, but it also means that God created them from nothing. That's two interpretations. Do they contradict? No. You have a multitude of interpretations, okay? That's it.
All right. I have another show on AP's channel starting in under half an hour, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Although I would say, guys, there's a link in the description box to the full debate. So if you want the rest of that Trinity discussion, it looks like the entire discussion is going to be the Christian side applying the standards that the Muslims used, and just taking those standards and applying them to the Muslim sources and saying, hey, if you're saying we're polytheists, then you guys are polytheists. So either declare yourselves polytheists or drop this objection to Christianity. Looks like that's what it's going to be. But yeah, I'll have to check that as well. Anyway, there's a link in the description box to Anthony's channel. And there's a link to the full debate. SIIIG, I didn't know until we were starting the live stream that you were jumping in. I've seen you on multiple channels. What channel do you want me to include in the description box for people to check out your stuff?
Just include my channel on my Patreon. That's all I'll ask. I have most of my stuff there. I have like a Discord server on Patreon. So if you might wanna get jiggy with the community, you know what I'm saying, patreon.com/SIIIG1. That's what you gotta do. But I'm gonna be live in a couple of days doing part 3 of this as well. So David, if you will have me, okay, I'd love to stream with you again sometime on your channel as well.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
that would be great. Yeah.
Yep. Right. We'll definitely do something. Maybe we'll try to get more streams that are friendly for our European viewers. All right, guys, give your final thoughts on everyone, and then we'll cut out. Anthony, what are your final thoughts, Anthony?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I hope as SIIG knocks off a 7-Eleven later, it goes well. No, I'm kidding. Great to be on. Great to see SIIG again. Great show. Love the topic, obviously. Daniel and Ijaz did horribly as I expected. Jay and Sam handily dealt with them. I didn't expect otherwise, especially on that topic. So good stuff. I don't know if I'll watch the rest of it because I don't expect it to go uphill from. You know what I mean? I just don't expect a whole lot from Haqiqatjou or Ijaz. I've seen enough of both guys. That doesn't mean everybody else shouldn't. I'm just saying personally, I'd rather read somebody like Saint Basil than listen to more Haqiqatjou. But I mean, I don't know. What do you do with these guys? But I always feel like this is like an unending game of whack-a-mole, because we refute this sort of dumb stuff all the time. We've been doing it for decades, right? I know David and we've both been around for decades, and we're still hearing the same dumb stuff. Haqiqatjou is not bringing up anything new. And it's okay if people are still using arguments that are good. There's nothing wrong with an argument having antiquity. But if it's been refuted, if it's bad, then it's bad if you keep bringing it up. And
Stop doing
his stuff is just plain bad, right? And so, it's like you refute one of these guys, and then you turn the corner, and somebody else is repeating the same dumb thing, and you're just going to keep doing that forever. And the only thing I'll say is I don't know about Ijaz these days, but I do remember when I heard Ijaz saying stuff, I sometimes thought this guy is saying stuff new, but it wasn't in a good sense. Because I always thought, his stuff was new because nobody else was wild enough.
No one cared about it.
Right?
Yeah.
It was such a harebrained idea that it was just outlandish. But, at least it was entertaining, if nothing else. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
I not impressed by these guys.
I mean, look, guys, to give my final thoughts, I mean, the crazy thing about the debate is that the debate was set up so that the Muslims can win, even down to like the titles of what was going through. Like Trinity versus Tawhid wasn't the way that it was supposed to be done philosophically, but they did it anyway. And somehow the Christians still win, okay? Because we're like that. We're really like that, okay? We got the truth. When I was looking at the debate, we got to the point where Ijaz was literally foaming at the mouth. He farts in the middle of the debate as well, which was crazy. That clip was going viral. Like, I'm not even kidding.
Eminem song?
Like he actually actually
just skipped.
And everyone heard you let one rip.
I mean, this is the problem that we have. But guys, I mean, I'm grateful to be on this channel to be talking about with two of my guys here, in David and in Anthony. We were both together in London as well. Doing the apologetics conference, which was a really good time, by the way. I had a great time there as well. I mean, when it comes like us younger guys that are coming into this spaces now, like we have to exhaust all of this literature, and we've noticed that people use philosophy especially as a weapon. They try to use these documents and try to weaponize it against Christians rather than actually, use knowledge for what it is, an enterprise that people should lovingly go into. And so I want my channel to be a place where, we joke around and laugh a lot, but we actually talk about these really in-depth issues and try to work out the truth. And so, you guys know where to find me: YouTube, Patreon. Find me there, man.
Yeah, and people might need to refresh their pages, but you had Mukau here. Where can I follow SIIIG? I put a link to his channel and to his Patreon in the description box. Again, you might have to refresh because I just added it. And Justin says, I know you've answered this a billion times, but I'm lazy. What is the most accurate direct translation of the Quran to English? I'd go with the Pickthall or a non-Muslim translation like the Arbery. Arbery is what AP said he thought, and I've just over the years noticed that Pickthall translates lots of. Same thing with Palmer. Except Pickthall's Muslim and Palmer's not. But some people just, I don't know. You just notice over and over again that whereas a bunch of other translations try to twist something, one of them will get it right. Anyway, So, but at the end of the day, I would recommend any passage you're concerned about getting inaccurate translations, pull up multiple translations and read it through multiple translations to kind of get the gist. Going along with what Anthony's saying, as far as my thoughts on the debate, as far as these guys using things that have been refuted. AP and I were just talking about this last night on AP's channel, where Daniel again in this debate brings up and claims that the Catholic Encyclopedia says that Mary was 12. And what did we do? We pulled up the Catholic Encyclopedia. Here's the thing: assuming he was ignorant and therefore not deceptive, because that's what you would assume when he brought up the Catholic Encyclopedia saying Mary was 12 in his debate with Inspiring Philosophy. You'd think, okay, maybe he's never read it and he heard that from another lying Dawa clown, right? So maybe he's not lying. Maybe he's trying to be honest, but he heard something from another lying Dawa clown. Maybe that other Dawa clown was a liar, and maybe Daniel's actually being honest. Problem is, we exposed him on this repeatedly. We'd actually show what the Catholic Encyclopedia says, which the Catholic Encyclopedia says we have no idea. And yet he continues to use it in every discussion on channel. But the Catholic Encyclopedia says she was 12. No, it doesn't.
Oh, by the way, David, he said Aquinas said that as well. He said Aquinas said that she was 12, which, by the way, guys, you can read the supplementum for yourself. Aquinas died before the supplementum was completed. He never completed his treatise on penance. The section of matrimony that's there, Aquinas himself never wrote that. That wasn't him. That was a later students who, by the way, in the Catholic Church are not saints, right? They're not saints, by the way. Later people that tried to compile what they thought Aquinas would have said. Now, they're not protected by divine infallible inspiration. So they could just be like getting Aquinas wrong. We don't know. Of course, maybe they be getting accurately. But you can't say Aquinas himself specifically wrote those words down because the guy was dead. He was dead. He's dead. He couldn't write the text. He couldn't write the text. So there you go.
And at the end of the day, if Thomas Aquinas says something, we want to say, okay, what's your basis for that? Do you have a good argument for that? What is your argument? And Aquinas would say the exact same thing. Aquinas would say the exact same thing. If I have a good argument for something, respect the argument. If I don't, then challenge me. He would say the exact same thing. And so this is, yeah, guys, I don't know what to do with dawah. It really seems like all dawah is trying to keep people in a state of ignorance and confusion and deception until Islam can take over by some military intervention and so on. And it's just pathetic. It's always deception, always has been, always will be, because that's what happens when you don't have a coherent position or coherent methodology. All right, thanks to Anthony and Tig for SIIG. I said Tig.
Thank you.
No, it was actually combined. I only saw a couple episodes of Sons of Anarchy, but there's a guy in there called Tig, and it's saying so when you were saying SIIG, I was thinking, it's Tig and the Sons of Anarchy reject. Actually, that's funny.
Nah, thank you so much for having me on, man. I appreciate you guys. God bless.
Yep, and let's keep the complete embarrassments of Islamic dawah going, and let's continue watching the dawah collapse in epic fashion as it's been doing. And as far as I know, let's see, I'll be on with AP in about 20 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. We will be going through the morality section of this debate. See you all then.
I'm gonna look at sound.